simple to get your dream body. Get this app called Fitbod and go to workout settings to set your preferences. If you want to build muscle, choose.
When I was 12 years old, my mom had just started trusting me enough to leave me home alone, so this had to be when I was 12. We live in a peaceful and ordinarily safe little town. Quiet streets, spacious yards, friendly neighbors, and a charming little village with a bunch of shops and restaurants. It really is not a place where you need to look over your shoulder at night if you're walking alone or anything like that. It just feels safe, which is part of the reason my parents trusted me home alone at such a young age. I still live with my parents today in the same house. The night in question, it was a weekend. My parents were leaving me home alone for the night. When we were really little, my grandparents would watch my older sister and I, but since my sister wasn't home for whatever reason, and since I was kind of old enough to be left alone at that age, my parents decided to just trust me by myself. My parents had us young, so they've always been a bit more active in the sense that they'd often travel or go out on the weekends with their friends. They left me some money for pizza for dinner. It was the ideal night for a 12 or 13-year-old. House to myself, video games all night, and pizza for dinner. I used to be obsessed with James Bond video games when I was a kid, so I was playing some game called Nightfire for like my third playthrough on my PS2. After I finished the game again, I decided to order the pizza. There was a pizza place right by our house called Gianni's. It's been closed for years now, but it was one of my family's go-to pizzerias. I ordered a regular pie. At the age of 12, I could easily eat 3 slices by myself. My mom told me to wrap the leftover slices in tinfoil and put them in the fridge. I switched out discs for another video game in the meantime while I waited for the pizza, and when the doorbell finally rang, I hurried downstairs with the $20 bill my parents left me. My mom told me to tip $4. The pizza place was like 3 blocks away, so honestly, it wasn't a bad tip, especially for the time. The delivery driver was some 30-something-year-old looking guy, though he looked a little rough. Like, he had a really long and gross beard. He also wore glasses and was wearing a black trucker's hat. I gave him the 20 and asked for the specific change. As he handed me the box and counted the change, he looked up at me and then looked past me into the house and said, "You alone here?" I knew it was an odd, creepy question, and my parents taught me well about being wary of strangers. I said my parents are on their way home. A stupid answer in retrospect. I could have just said no, but I knew he was asking because first of all there were no cars in the driveway, and the fact that a kid was accepting the pizza at the door instead of an adult. After he handed me the change, I closed the door. I ate in the kitchen, probably had 3 slices, and then wrapped up the rest of them and put them in the fridge. I went back upstairs and played my other James Bond PS2 game, Agent Under Fire. I liked this one less than Nightfire, but it was still good. Hours go by of me playing. It was probably 11 o'clock when the doorbell rang. Naturally, thinking it was my parents, I rushed downstairs to the door. I said through the door, "Mom? Dad?" But an unfamiliar voice on the other side said, "Hey, I need help." They said they need to use a phone. I said, "Who is this?" And he repeated that he just needs to use a phone. I didn't want to peek through the window because, quite honestly, I was scared. I decided to go upstairs and ignore it. I knew from common sense alone that opening that door would be a horrible, horrible idea. I was walking up the stairs, which are directly in front of the front door, when the man outside banged on the door, and I heard him say, "Wait, please, I need help." What that meant was that he saw me. He was watching through the glass at the top of the door. I turned around, and though it was dark on the front porch, I could still see the outline of the man's head. Though I couldn't see his eyes, it was obvious that he was staring back at me. I ran upstairs and ran to my parents' room. The only house phone that was upstairs was in my parents' room, so I went to the phone immediately and called my mom's cell phone number. I didn't memorize my dad's number at that age. My mom picked up the phone, likely under the influence of a few glasses of wine, and then I told her that there's someone at the door asking to come in. This comment likely sobered her up instantly, as I remember her tone shifted dramatically, and she sounded much louder and more concerned. She asked me a few questions. Firstly, if I had answered the man or at all made him aware that I was home, and I told the truth and said yes. I asked who it was. My mom's tone grew more and more concerned. She asked me if for any reason someone knew I was there by myself, and I immediately thought of the pizza guy. I told her that the pizza guy asked if I were here alone, and around this time, the doorbell rang 2 more times. I told my mom in a panic, expressing that the guy would not leave. My mom told me to stay put in their room and keep the bedroom door locked. She said they were calling the police. My mom kept me on the line with her on her phone while they called the police using my dad's phone. They had to leave the restaurant they were in to go outside to better be able to communicate. It was a summer night. The windows were all cracked open to let some air into the house, and through my parents' window, I heard the gate on one side of the house leading to the backyard opening. It opened in a very discreet, gentle-sounding way. I told this to my mom, and she kept telling me to just stay quiet, stay in their room, and keep the lights off. I said quietly into the phone, "What if he tries getting in through the den window?" My mom would tell me to just stop talking and wait for the police. She would continue talking into the phone, feeding me updates from the police and their ETA, reminding me also to not talk. I was starting to calm down just a bit when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Footsteps of someone inside the house, wandering around. I whispered this in a panic to my mom, and I heard her scream something into the other phone to the police. Probably something along the lines of, "The man is inside the house, hurry up." My mom told me to hide under the bed and wait there. For my 12-year-old self, it was the most horrific, unreal moment of my life. The only thing keeping me feeling relatively protected was the tiny little lock on my parents' bedroom door. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. The stairs are by my sister and I's bedroom down the hall. My parents' bedroom is further down. The footsteps faded for a few moments, I'm assuming as the intruder went into our bedrooms, searching. My mom told me the police would force their way in and to not move until they were inside. I heard the footsteps in the hallway coming down this way until they got to the bedroom door, and then they tried pressing down the doorknob only to find it locked. They tried a few times, as if that would somehow magically unlock the door. Then there was a light knocking on the door, but the person on the other side didn't speak a word. They tried the doorknob one more time before I heard the footsteps walk back down the hallway, then down the stairs, and they faded away deeper into the house. I did my best not to burst out into tears the entire time. I didn't even whisper anything into the phone because I was too scared to make the slightest sound. My mom finally told me the police were there, but to still stay put. I was expecting to hear them kick down the door, but instead, I just rather suddenly heard multiple heavy footsteps and a man shouting my name, identifying himself as a police officer. I heard them coming up the stairs, and my mom gave me permission to answer them and unlock the door. There were 2 officers upstairs when I opened the door, and then 2 more downstairs. They didn't have to kick down the front door because the back door was left completely ajar. The back sliding window was also slid completely open, which was the obvious original entry point. I had to talk with the police and tell them everything that happened, including my suspicion of the pizza guy, with my parents listening in on the phone. They were en route home, and by the time they got back, there were only 2 police officers still at the house. With the police report including a note of the pizza guy, they said they'd do their investigation. My parents brought me to Gianni's Pizzeria the next night and asked me to point the guy out if I saw him. When I didn't see him, they asked the manager which employee matched the description of the delivery guy I described. He said that would be Phil, who was currently out doing a delivery. After explaining the whole scenario, he said there's no way that would be Phil and asked us to leave the premises. Long story short, my parents made a big scene in the pizzeria, and they said they would never give them our business again. We went to the car and waited in the parking lot. We waited for almost an hour, and when he never showed up, we left. My parents thought it was because the manager called or texted the employee, which caused him not to show back up, but who knows? My parents contacted a few lawyers who ultimately didn't take the case due to a lack of solid evidence, stating it would be a waste of time, basically. Ultimately, we never did go back to that pizzeria, and it wasn't for a long while after that that my parents felt safe leaving me home alone again, simply because of this incident. Ultimately, I do think it was the pizza guy, or at least someone associated with him, because who else would have known that I was home alone that night? When I was a teenager, my parents and I moved from California to a secluded area in North Idaho. My parents had just retired and built their dream home deep in the backcountry. We had no neighbors in sight, just forest. Endless, dense forest that backed right up to national parklands and paper mill logging grounds. The house was massive, 2 stories, a gym, a full bar and pool room, and a legit movie theater set up in the basement. It felt like the kind of house people dream of. Remote, quiet, perfect. Or so it seemed. I was dating my high school girlfriend at the time. One night, while my parents were out on a date downtown, I invited her over to hang out and watch a movie. We were completely alone. I cracked open a beer. I was underage, but figured no one would care, and we headed down to the movie room to watch Gladiator. Everything started out normal, but somewhere around the midpoint of the movie, maybe close to midnight, something switched in me. Out of nowhere, I was overwhelmed with this fight or flight feeling. It was like my body sensed something my brain couldn't see. My heart was pounding, and I kept glancing at the uncovered windows behind us that looked out into the pitch black woods. I didn't want to freak out my girlfriend, so I kept it to myself. In fact, things got a little heated between us during the movie. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I didn't know from where, but I knew. After the movie ended, I walked her upstairs and out to her car. The house was dead quiet again. She drove off, and I turned to go back inside, when I remembered I'd left the bar, pool room, and movie room lights on. So I went back downstairs. I turned off the lights in the movie room first, then paused. My eyes drifted to the large window that looked into the backyard, and that's when I saw him. Man, he looked homeless. Wild hair, filthy clothes, but what froze me in place was his expression. He had the biggest, creepiest smile I've ever seen, with wide, staring eyes that looked absolutely deranged. And in his hand was a knife. He was gently tapping it on the glass over and over. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. I slowly backed away and went to the bar room to shut off the rest of the lights. That room has a sliding glass door that also faces the woods. I flipped the switch and watched in horror as the man calmly walked from the window to the door, still smiling, still staring. At this point, we were less than a foot apart, just the glass between us. He didn't try to get in. He didn't move at all. He just watched me. I went upstairs without a word. Right then, my parents were walking through the door. I told them I think I need to go to the psych ward or something. I swear I just saw a guy with a knife watching me outside. My mom went pale. My dad's eyes narrowed, and without a word, he went to the gun safe, grabbed his rifle, and stormed out to check the property. I asked my mom what was going on, and she said there have been a few break-ins in the area. A guy wandering through the woods trying to get into homes. The description you gave matches exactly. The police were called, but they didn't find anything. No signs of entry, no footprints, just cold, black woods. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, as I tried to sleep, I could hear a light tapping sound beneath me. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, directly above the movie room. It sounded like metal gently tapping glass. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. The tapping lasted for hours. This happened night after night for weeks. Sometimes it would stop. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and hear it faintly again. I even thought I heard footsteps on the roof one night. I checked the windows, but I never saw anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked, watched. Then winter came. My parents had to go out of town for a few days, but they were still nervous about what had happened. Before they left, they gave me a shotgun just in case. We also had a big Rottweiler, sweetest dog you'd ever meet and totally silent, unless something was really there. One night while I was home alone, I heard slow, crunching footsteps in the snow outside, heavy and deliberate. The dog stood up, ears perked, and began growling low and deep at the front door. Then barking, ferocious, loud, and non-stop. He only ever did that when he saw something real. I stayed silent. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was home. I didn't move. Then came the knock. Slow, hollow, and taunting. I didn't answer. I slept with the shotgun next to me that night. Door locked, blinds drawn, dog at my feet. The next morning, I went outside and saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Fresh human footprints circled the entire house. They stopped at every single window, like someone was trying to look in, searching for me. I followed the prints around the property, and they eventually led into the forest. I followed them maybe half a mile before they started to zigzag, veer off, loop back, like whoever made them was trying to throw me off their trail. I turned back. Something told me it was a bad idea to keep going.
The bold Louisiana flavor and crispy crunch of Popeye's signature chicken is the meal you're craving.
That night, the tapping came back, louder this time. I knew it was him. I unlocked my door, grabbed my shotgun, and stepped onto the second-story deck. I flipped on the fog lights that illuminated the backyard. There he was. Same man, same smile, and same dead eyes. He was holding the knife again, staring directly at me like he could see through me. I raised the shotgun and shouted, "If you don't leave, I'll put one right through you." He didn't move or flinch, just stared unblinking, grinning. I fired a warning shot into the air, and that finally got a reaction. He staggered a bit, then slowly backed into the woods, still facing me. That's when I decided to unleash the dog. I sprinted downstairs, threw open the sliding door, and let him loose. He bolted into the forest like a black missile, barking and snarling. I'd never seen him that aggressive. He had a shock collar, so he couldn't go far, but I like to think he chased that guy off for good, because after that night, I never saw him again. This happened in March of 2022 during spring break. I was in my second year of college. My friends and I, 6 of us total, decided to rent a cabin out in South Carolina for a few days, just to get away from everything. No school, no stress, no phones. It was supposed to be one of those quiet trips where you drink too much, play music too loud, and maybe make some memories you'll laugh about later. There were 4 of us guys, me, Matt, Chris, and Tyler, and 2 girls, Jess and Sarah. We'd all been close since freshman year. The cabin we picked was stupid cheap for its size. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, 2 bathrooms, and listed as being on private land near a lake. It was way out there, no towns for miles, surrounded by forest. The guy who owned it had a thick accent and seemed kind of off when we talked to him on the phone. All he said was, "Just don't go wandering too deep into the woods. Some old stuff back there. Wells, busted fences, snakes. You don't want to get turned around." We laughed about it, thought he was just trying to add some spooky southern charm to the trip. But when we got there, it wasn't funny. The drive took forever. GPS gave out an hour before we arrived. The last part of the road was just dirt and gravel, barely wide enough for 1 car. Trees got thicker the closer we got. When we finally saw the cabin, we all kind of went quiet. It didn't look like the pictures. It was older and dirtier. The windows were dusty, and a few of the shutters were hanging off by the hinges. There was this faint smell outside, like old garbage and wet wood. We brushed it off and made jokes, said it just added character. We unloaded, claimed rooms, and started drinking by 7 p.m. The first night was fun. We grilled outside, cranked music from a Bluetooth speaker, and played some card games. By 11, it got cold, so we moved inside. That's when I noticed how dark the woods were. I don't mean just nighttime dark. I mean complete blackness. The porch lights barely lit up more than a few feet, and the trees were so dense it felt like they were pressing in from all sides. No bugs, no wind, just total, heavy silence. We ended up crashing around 2 a.m. I had one of the rooms on the ground floor, right next to the kitchen. Small and just a bed and a window facing the woods. At around 4:15, I woke up. No reason, just wide awake like someone had poked me. I laid there for a second, heart beating fast. Then I heard it. Tap, Tap. Tap. I thought it was the heater at first, but then it repeated. Steady, non-metallic, non-mechanical. It sounded like fingers. I looked at the window, and there was a man standing there. He was pressed up against the glass, face almost touching it. Pale skin, wild hair, no shirt, just staring in. His mouth hung slightly open like he was breathing through it. His eyes were wide. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there and tapped, soft and slow, like he was trying to tease me. I felt like my body locked up. Then the tapping got a little faster. I whispered for Matt, who was sleeping on the couch outside my room. I said his name again, louder. He woke up groggy and asked what I wanted. I just pointed. He looked over, saw the man, and immediately jumped up, knocking over the coffee table. That must have scared the guy off, because by the time Matt turned the porch light on and ran outside, he was gone. We all got up. The girls were terrified. Tyler tried to convince everyone it was just some drunk local messing with us. Chris said maybe it was a hunter who got lost, but I knew it was that guy watching me. He wasn't lost. We blocked the doors, moved the in front of the big living room window, and took turns staying awake for a few hours. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, we went outside. There were footprints, bare human footprints circling the entire cabin. They stopped at every window, every single one, even the little one above the upstairs shower. That should have been it. We should have left, but we didn't. We were dumb and stubborn, and we stayed. Night 2 started the same. Drinks, music, fire pit, but the energy was different. Everyone kept glancing at the woods. Jess didn't drink, and Chris kept his hunting knife on his belt. When we finally went inside, we locked every window and double-checked the doors. Around 3:30 a.m., Matt went to the kitchen for water. He stopped in the hallway and called my name. I got up and saw him standing there, pointing. There was someone in the kitchen, the man from before, but this time he was inside, naked. His back was to us, covered in long, raw-looking scratches. He was standing in front of the fridge, staring at it like he didn't know what it was. He made this slow, swaying motion like he was rocking on his feet. Matt didn't speak. He just backed up. We all gathered silently at the hallway entrance. I had a pocket knife. Sarah had the fire poker. Chris grabbed one of the chair legs he'd snapped earlier, trying to be funny. We turned on the light, and the man was gone. The back door was wide open, but it wasn't broken. It wasn't forced. It was just open. We left 20 minutes later. No one argued. We packed only the basics, wallets, keys, phones, and drove through the woods until we had enough signal to call the sheriff. When we met the deputy at a diner off the highway, he didn't look surprised at all. He asked if anyone was hurt, then said, "Yeah, we've had some trouble with folks squatting up in those woods, not always right in the head." We tried to explain it wasn't just some homeless guy. This man watched us, came back 2 nights in a row, and had a key or somehow got inside. The deputy just nodded like he'd heard it before. When we mentioned the owner, his face almost implied that he knew the guy. The listing disappeared a few days later, completely wiped from every rental site. We never got answers, never got a call. We never even got our deposit back. But that face, the way he looked at me through the window, I still see it sometimes when I wake up at night. We don't talk about that trip much anymore, but as far as I know, none of us have been back to South Carolina since. When I was 22, I started seeing a guy who I met on a dating app for a while. His name was Hunter. We went on like 4 dates in the span of a little over a month. At first, things seemed alright. Our first date was a quick coffee date, less than an hour. More of a screening process to make sure he seemed normal. Our second date was at a nearby bar for some drinks. We both got a nice buzz, and it was a nice time. Our third date was dinner, and this was when I started to question things. questioned if I really clicked with his personality or if I felt like there was something slightly off about him. The date ended with a kiss still, the first and only time we ever kissed, so I convinced myself that because I let him kiss me, things went alright. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that we went on our fourth and final date. We went out for drinks once again. However, this time I went into it with a less excited mindset, and I was paying more attention to little quirks in his behavior that I realized were kind of unusual. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean, but some of his mannerisms just gave off antisocial and borderline creepy vibes. He started to drink way too much on this date as well, and he started getting really touchy-feely at the bar, trying to kiss multiple times. I'm not a fan of PDA, especially not when sitting at a bar with people next to me. I politely turned down his advances, and within a few minutes, I mentioned I was tired, heavily implying we should leave. He asked for the check, paid it, and then we grabbed our coats and left. As we were walking to our cars, he stopped me and very bluntly asked me if we could go home together. I said not tonight, I'm tired and have work tomorrow, which was a lie. He shockingly kept trying, saying he'd drive me to work tomorrow and such. I found it to be absurd whether he was drunk or not. I also wasn't a fan of him drunk driving home. I made the decision at that point that I wouldn't see him again. I went to my car in the parking lot across the street and started driving home slowly, just because I had a couple drinks in my system. I wasn't drunk, but I was still very cautious. I was also overly alert of my surroundings, looking around for cops, which perhaps is why I picked up on the fact that the same car was behind me still after I made at least 3 turns. And at a certain stoplight, I realized it looked like Hunter's car. I texted him, "Are you following me?" He texted back pretty quickly, saying, "Yes, I just want to make sure you get home okay." I called him, but he wouldn't pick up. This was so weird, and quite frankly creepy. I pulled over and texted him to stop following me, I'm fine. He stopped in the middle of the street for a second, I presume to read my texts, and then he drove off past me. He didn't text back, not until I got home and was in bed. He said as follows, "I hope I didn't weird you out tonight. Sorry I got so drunk. Next time we should do something a little more low-key, like dinner at my place or something." I didn't answer. So the next morning, he followed up with, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" I still decided to wait a bit to respond. Not even 2 hours later, he sends me a question mark. So I decided to reply now before it got worse. I said, "Hey, I had a great time getting to know you, but I just think our personalities don't click that much. I also really just want to focus on myself right now. I hope you understand." After this was when the angry text started coming in. The worst of which being, "No, I don't understand. You strung me along for 4 dates to tell me that? How about you pay me back half of everything I bought for you then?" There were a few other angry texts that involved personal information, so I'm not going to include them, but they were enough to prompt me to block him. I thought this would be the end of it, but then I started receiving no caller ID phone calls non-stop. I ignored all of them until he finally seemed to get the message and stopped. The next day, when my parents weren't home, I got home from work to find a bouquet of flowers on the stoop along with a card. The card was an apology from Hunter, asking for a second chance. He somehow knew where I lived. That disturbed me. In his mind, he somehow must have thought that this would come off as charming or sweet, when in reality it was extremely alarming. I sent a long and final text to him to please not contact me anymore and never come to my house again or I'd file for a restraining order. I kept his number blocked so I wouldn't see his response. I thought things would be over now, but I couldn't be more wrong. It was not long after this that I was home alone for the night. My parents' house is big, and I had a loft bedroom, which meant my bedroom was the highest point in the house. I awoke in the middle of the night to something. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but I felt as though I was hearing noises from downstairs. I tried my best to listen closely, and then I heard what was very obviously a door opening from outside my bedroom. One of the upstairs doors. Nobody was supposed to be home that night. Even in my haze from freshly waking up, I still immediately thought intruder. I crawled out of my bed onto the floor and shimmied under the bed. Before calling 911, I texted everyone in my family asking who was home. I heard some distant noises from somewhere in the home, one of the other bedrooms. And then my bedroom door opened, and footsteps came up the carpeted stairs. After they reached the top step, there was silence. The whole room was carpeted, so I couldn't hear any potential footsteps. And then I heard the drawers next to my bed begin opening. I held my mouth with my hands to mask my breathing. I could feel my heart racing. I heard a man's voice say, "God fucking damn it," under his breath. In that moment, I thought, wait, that might have sounded like Hunter's voice. I still didn't move, and I prayed my phone did not get any notifications now. I heard more rummaging sounds. He was going through my entire dresser. Then, I heard and felt the bed move as he sat down. I was staring at the outline of 2 shoes through the bed skirt. Even in the dark, it was visible. I don't know what he was doing on the bed, but he sat there for over 2 or 3 minutes before getting up, and I heard him say under his breath, "Fucking bitch." I heard all the drawers close, and then I heard footsteps walk back down the stairs, the door shutting, and then sounds of footsteps walking down the stairs to the living room. I called 911 now, and I still whispered into the phone just to be safe. I stayed on the line and stayed under the bed for 10 to 15 minutes until one of the police officers showed up, and I went down to meet them at the front door, and even that was tense. After letting him in, I told him everything he didn't already know from the phone call he responded to. As such, he did a sweep of the house, and during that another officer arrived, this one female, who also assisted in the search. It turned out every window was unlocked, and one of the windows, the dining room one, is big enough for someone to crawl through, though I don't think anyone ever pictured someone squeezing through the bush in front of the window and then crawling through it. I gave a verbal statement of everything. I was given a report number and they left. When my parents returned home the next day, they already knew everything from my texts and phone call with them. We went to the police station with my report number and gave as much information as possible, such as text screenshots, including him admitting he was following me home. They said they'd investigate, though without solid proof it was him inside the house, it was tricky. I think the case lost steam when I really didn't have any proof of anything. I did, however, successfully get a restraining order against him, and I was advised to never accuse him of having broken in, nor ever contact him again. He thankfully didn't, but from that point till the moment I moved out of my parents' house, I was always uncomfortable he would be creeping around outside. Even today, I sometimes fear he might find out where I currently live. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. This all started on the week of Halloween, when I would stay after school to help decorate a haunted house for my school's Halloween carnival. I often got to stay and fool around with some of my friends while getting awarded with pizza for helping decorate. Along with my friends, there was also this other kid who would stay late. I'll call him Chris. We had gotten along for the entirety of the time that we would stay after school, and he never once gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely a funny and cool kid. But anyway, fast forward 2 weeks. I was suddenly approached by a group of girls in my grade who were all excited and had wide grins on their faces. I asked them what was going on, only for them to tell me that I had a secret admirer and that he would be texting me tonight. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't excited, or at the very least curious about this. I wanted to know who. Later that night, when I was about to go to sleep, I got a notification from Messenger. It was the only app I had at the time that I always used to communicate with my parents whenever I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten that I added him on Facebook on Halloween. I opened the message and it read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I was concerned and quickly replied, "Yeah, what's going on? Everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't The typing bubbles appeared and stayed there for a good 2 minutes, which meant that he was still typing. It felt like forever until his message finally came through. I didn't expect what came next. In a long paragraph, he confessed his love for me and how I've been driving him crazy since Halloween. He also proceeded to explain how he tried to impress me during recess and phys ed with his soccer skills, but that I never seemed to notice him. He said that he was growing tired of being ignored, and it ended with, "I want you to notice me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I stared at the message for a long time. What the hell, I barely even know this kid, and I drifted apart from him a long time ago. I was trying to come up with a way to let him down easily, as I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him like that, and that I wanted to just be friends. I could tell right away that he didn't like this answer. He kept asking me,
KM Fenway Franks are the official hot dog of the... Wally, we've been over...
why, and I had to come up with a reason each time until he eventually stopped answering. The next morning was a nightmare for me. Some of his friends kept coming up to me and telling me that Chris wanted to kiss me, which he told the entire grade he wanted to do and that he would do it even if it meant cornering me. Taking this as a threat, I decided to tell my teacher. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he ever got even close to me, to run right back to the classroom. This wasn't enough for me. I reported him to the principal, who told me he would do something right away, and this gave me some relief. I feel I should mention that I lived right across the street from my school, and everyone knew this, including Chris, which leads me to what happened next. Later on in the week, I was walking home from school. I hadn't even been inside my house for more than 2 minutes before I heard someone knocking on my front door. I peeked out the window just in time to see someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have been following me. My mom opened the door to find a piece of paper on the floor, and not surprisingly, it was addressed to me. I read the note out loud, and it said there was a surprise waiting for me under the Cadillac in my driveway, which at the time belonged to my brother. My mom went to check, only to find nothing. But it was after this day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. I still have no idea what Chris did to the car, but my brother was forced to sell it. Unfortunately, my nightmare doesn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, telling me to give him a chance and that he would treat me right. There was even a moment when I caught Chris taking a picture of me walking home, and the only reason I saw him was because I barely heard the sound of an iPhone camera behind me. Who knows how many photos of me he had on his phone. And every morning I woke up to a message from him with something along the lines of, "I can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The harassment and stalking were only getting worse, and it was making me fear for my safety, especially now that he knew where I lived. Finally, I got a call into the counselor's office and I felt relieved, expecting her to tell me that Chris was going to get in trouble or that the cops would get involved. Anything. Instead, what I heard was worse. The counselor proceeded to tell me that boys will be boys, that they do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about this. She told me I should feel flattered as this kind of stuff was bound to happen, and that the only thing I could do was to accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't see the problem with her words, as I genuinely believed her, but looking back on it now, this was an insane and disturbing thing to say to a 6th grader who was being sexually harassed and who was fearing for her safety almost every day. That afternoon, I came home from school telling my mom everything the counselor told me, and she was rightfully furious. I was called to the principal's office again that same week, this time with my mom present. I remember very clearly my mom telling the counselor and principal, "What are you waiting for something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She continued to ask why it was taking so long for something to be done. They both stayed silent. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor and telling her to never speak to me again unless she was present. But unfortunately, I don't think the school ever did punish Chris, which to this day enrages me. He basically got away with everything. It doesn't even end there. One night during the weekend, when my parents had gone shopping, I was about to go to bed after watching a YouTube video on my iPad, when I heard something at my window. Now, I'm on the 2nd floor, so this was especially strange. The only thing that hits my window are birds accidentally flying into it. I sat up listening. Then it happened again. It sounded as if someone had thrown something at the glass. Then it happened again and again. They were consistent thuds, and it was starting to freak me out. I finally got the courage to get up from my bed and see what it was. My heart dropped into my stomach when I opened the curtain and looked down to see Chris holding a handful of rocks, looking up at my window. He somehow had managed to figure out which window was mine. He was about to throw another when he noticed me. I could ever so slightly see that he was saying something, but I didn't stop to see what. I remember going to see if every window and door was locked, and thankfully everything was. When I returned to my room, I received 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave? I just want to talk. I'm sorry, all I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me. You are not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, even though I had to see him throughout the entirety of my school years, from 6th grade to senior year. The last thing I heard about him was that he was arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest and scariest part of my story, though, is the fact that a counselor was comfortable with telling me that this kind of behavior was a compliment and a learning experience for me as a girl. I just hope that woman no longer works with children and that I never have to see Chris again. I want to stay as anonymous as possible with this. This was a very serious occurrence that I have PTSD about, and unfortunately, it's scarred me. I'm changing all towns and names in this story, so there's no way it gets traced back to me. I've been a very reclusive person most of my life. It started at a young age. Even in my early school years, my teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavioral problems. I would even be included in some of the, I guess you would say, special 20-minute classes for speech and behavior in elementary school. At the time, I didn't comprehend why I was being brought there while the rest of my class wasn't. Middle school was when the pressures of the social hell that school is really started to set in. Kids started forming their friend groups, and that only carried over into high school and got worse. I never had learning disabilities or anything. I just had social issues, which had gotten better as I've grown older. But I would still consider myself an awkward, introverted person. However, I've made my close friends, and I'm grateful for that. But now let's talk about girls. Of course, being a social recluse comes with having trouble with the ladies. Honestly, not to get too graphic, but it means something to my story. I lost my virginity at 21. That's a bit late, I'd say. This was at the age of 23. I moved out of my parents' place already. I had been working a high-paying job in my field for a couple of years at that point already, and I bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was pretty affordable, but a nice and big townhouse. I don't live there anymore, but it was 2 floors. It was the kind of place that would impress girls at 23 if you owned it. So one day swiping on Tinder, I matched a pretty decent-looking girl. I'll call her Emily. We went on a date at a nearby restaurant for dinner. I was a little in my head, thinking she was judging me or I was acting awkward, and by the end of it, I felt like she'd never want to see me again. But when I was in bed after getting home, she told me she really liked me and had fun, and I was ecstatic, honestly. So we went on a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th date, and honestly, things felt great after I got out of my head. We became boyfriend-girlfriend fairly quickly, but the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. When you first start seeing someone, you get excited anytime they text or call you. You crave the attention because ideally it's a two-way thing. But slowly, I started feeling as though she was texting me maybe a bit too much. At all times of the day, she'd ask where I was. If I was doing something, or perhaps took my time in responding, she'd call me or send question marks to follow up. One day when we were on the couch, she demanded we share our locations with each other. I wasn't thrilled about this, even though I had nothing to hide. I did it anyway. So we're a couple months into the relationship, our location shared, and this is where things went really sour. She'd start asking me why I was at Phil's house and not answering her texts. It got so bad that one night when I was with Phil and my friend Mark in Phil's basement on a Friday night, she actually showed up to his house, and Phil's mom walked Emily downstairs. She didn't even hide the fact that she was pissed at me, and immediately spoke in a loud voice, almost a yell, reprimanding me for goofing around at Phil's house instead of answering her texts about going to some winery the following day. I asked her if we could discuss this later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside with her. We had an argument in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I told her no. We both drove separately, obviously, so I drove home and told her not to follow me. When I got home, I sent her a long text telling her we need a break and I need space. Should I have done this in person? Yeah, probably. Text message breakups aren't fair most of the time. But honestly, in the moment, I was scared of what her reaction would be in person. Of course, she started calling me over and over, blowing up my phone with texts. When I eventually stopped answering, I got aggressive pounds at my front door of my townhouse and constant rings from the doorbell. It got so bad that my neighbor actually came out and asked her what she was doing. I heard Emily screaming at him that I'm a piece of shit and this and that, and my neighbor calmly told her to go home. I listened to everything with my ear basically up to the door. She did leave, and honestly, I was kind of disturbed. I'm not saying the crazy just came out of nowhere, there were definitely signs, but I was blind to some of it because of the honeymoon effects. The next day, I remembered to stop sharing my location with her, and immediately, as if she were obsessively checking our texts, she angrily blows me up for doing that. I was more and more sure of my decision to cut ties with her every text she sent. My final text to her was, "I'm sorry, Emily, I have to block you for a while, you're scaring me." She surprisingly didn't come knocking or anything. However, I noticed she instantly stopped sharing her location as well. It was exactly 1 week later. I went over to Phil's house again and chilled with the guys. I left around 11 p.m. and got home shortly after. I wasn't tired and I was hungry, so I threw some food in the microwave and plopped on the couch to watch a movie. I was browsing all the streaming apps for something good. I wanted a scary movie. When the microwave beeped and it went silent, I suddenly heard a click or thud from the dining room. So the layout of the downstairs of the townhouse, it looped around in a circle. It went from the kitchen to dining room to living room to den, and they were all separated by a wall in the middle. However, the den to the dining room had a door, not an opening. I attached this photo to give a better idea. To allow for complete silence, I grabbed the TV remote and muted the TV, and it was then that I surely heard the door separating the den and the dining room clicking open. I peered into the dining room. I blurted out, "Who's in here?" to of course nothing in response. I entered the dining room, my blood running cold as I saw that door was opened. I have a thing for keeping doors in my home shut, and that door was no exception. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife from the knife block. I also called 911 right away. I had never called 911 once in my life. This was a first. On the phone, I spoke really loud so that whoever was in there would hear that I was on the phone with the police. Whether this was a good idea or not, I guess is debatable. I said, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend has broken into my house. Please send someone." The rest of that call was explaining what exactly was going on, why I thought it was my ex, and her instructing me to wait outside if possible. So I went outside and waited not far from the front door. Surprisingly quickly, a police car rolled up. I once again briefly explained what I thought was going on, and I led the officer into my home. We both performed the most thorough search of the place together, and I'm telling you, no one was in there. We checked the mini crawl space hidden in the closet. We checked every closet for that matter. We checked under the beds, under the couches, even the mini attic too. When the coast was quite literally clear, he told me to call again if I heard anything, which said to me that he believed me and knew I wasn't making it up or going crazy. My night was obviously disturbed after that. No way I was going to be able to sit in the living room and watch a movie now. I ate my food, which had been sitting in the microwave, and went up to my room and locked the door. I texted all my friends and family, of course, about how spooked I was, but given that no one was in there, I had to dismiss it as just one of those creepy moments of something in the house moving by itself. I almost texted Emily, but refrained from doing so. I took a melatonin, and from what I remember, I quickly drifted off to sleep surprisingly. However, I'm a light sleeper, and something caused me to wake up. I didn't know what it was, but something in the room felt off. I checked my phone, and I had a bunch of texts from a random number. That must have been what woke me up. I quickly realized it was Emily. In short, without reading the paragraph she sent me, she was stating how sorry she was and that she wanted to talk. She was begging me to see her to talk tomorrow in person, and the rest of the texts were her saying, "Are you awake?" and "wake up" over and over. She said "wake up" a total of 8 times over text. Surprisingly, she hadn't tried calling me though. I responded, "Why are you awake right now? This is crazy that you're blowing me up at an hour like this. Honestly, if I wasn't sure before, your actions just these past few days alone have confirmed that I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Please just leave me alone." Seconds after I pressed send, I heard a scream from inside of the closet next to my bed. It was Emily's voice, yelling the word no, and then the closet door burst open. I didn't have time to think of anything besides jumping out of the bed and getting that bedroom door open and getting out of the room. It wasn't locked anymore, mind you. Once out of the room, I pushed the door shut and held it shut as she tried opening the door. She didn't just try opening it though. She started stabbing the door, and I saw the knife she was wielding piercing through my side. In the moment, I decided to scream, "Baby, I love you, stop," instead of something like, "You're sick and you need help." When I said I loved her, she stopped and calmed down, and I took this moment to call 911 again silently while still holding the door shut. At this moment, we spoke through the door to each other while I had 911 on the line, and I came up with some bullshit on the spot that I was going through a rough time right now, but that I loved her and was planning on getting back with her. She said in a frantic voice, "That's all I wanted to hear, why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She asked me to open the door. I had to stall though. I told her I was scared and wanted her to drop the knife. Eventually, she agreed, and I told her to throw it across the room so I could hear it land. She did so. I heard the clang of the knife ricocheting off the wall and onto the floor. So what I did next, I yanked the door open and tackled Emily to the floor. She screamed and fought and went hysterical. I didn't care. I held her down as I yelled my address and everything into the phone, which was still connected to 911. I held her down all the way until the police arrived. To my surprise, the police literally kicked the front door down, and it was so loud it could be heard over Emily struggling all the way upstairs. Police entered the room quickly, a surprising amount of police actually. Emily was put in cuffs quickly, and she was hysterically crying. I think the only reason I wasn't crying was because I was in such shock. This was the worst, most scarring night of my life. The nightmare didn't end there though. There was such a long and serious legal process that followed as far as getting Emily convicted. I never wanted my name or any info to be out there on the internet to end up on one of those crime YouTube channels, so I've been careful about leaking too much information that could get back to me. Emily's in prison for some very serious charges. No part of that makes me happy. This was someone I spent a little chunk of my life with more or less every day. Someone I thought I loved. Someone who tried to kill me. She was not right in the head, and it still pains me how oblivious I was, not only because of how infatuated I became at first, but because of my own lack of self-confidence to a degree that I was so focused on impressing her at first that I didn't even pay attention to certain alarming behaviors on her part early on. I know this will stick with me forever, and honestly, even if anonymously, it would feel good to get this story out there finally if it's chosen to be read.
Haven't tried new Parmesan stuffed crust? Sign in or sign up for Domino's Rewards to get one for 50% off.
You guys unpacked your room yet?
A lot of Americans think they'll never afford a home. Instead of lowering expectations,
This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men and we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. The two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by, and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy. and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first.
Where's your playlist taking you? Down the highway? To the mountains? Or just into daydream mode while you're stuck in traffic? With over 4,000...
But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, My phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff. Stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too. Your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which he actually found pretty funny. Then that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something. My name's Ariel, and I live in Georgia, not too far from the Alabama border. Several summers ago, I made the drive out to this small town in Alabama for a 4th of July cookout my college friend Isabel was throwing. One of those backyard setups with paper plates, bootleg fireworks, and way too much food. It was one of the better nights I'd had in a while. Good people, good energy, kids running around with sparklers, that kind of thing. I didn't leave until a little after 10, which, looking back, was probably my first mistake. That part of the state gets real quiet once the sun goes down. The drive home was going to take a little over 2 hours. Most of the route was back roads, long, empty stretches of dark 2-lane roads with nothing but thick tree lines on either side. Every now and then, I'd pass an old farmhouse or a tiny church with a gravel lot, but for the most part, it was just darkness and more darkness. I had music playing low, and I was still in a good mood from the party, but I won't lie, there was something about driving through places like that at night that gets under my skin, even when there's no real reason to be afraid. I've always been somewhat scared of the dark, so I bet that plays into it a little too. About 30 minutes in, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured someone else had just hopped onto the same back road. But the longer it stayed there, the more I started to pay attention. It was a gray Nissan Altima, nothing unusual. Except the bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through mud. I could see it clearly anytime we passed one of those overhead lights at a small crossing. Even still, that wasn't that weird on its own. But after a while, I realized no matter how much I sped up or slowed down, that car matched me exactly. At first, I thought it might have been just a coincidence, so I sped up a little, maybe 5-10 miles an hour over what I was doing before, but the Altima did the same, so I instead tapped my brakes and let myself drift well below the limit. Again, same results. The distance between us never changed. Now keep in mind, on roads like that, people pass each other all the time. It's not even illegal in most spots. I moved slightly to the right a couple times to make it obvious that I was giving the space they needed if they want to go around, but they didn't. They just stayed exactly where they were, about 6 or 7 car lengths back. That's when I decided to test them. There was a random left turn coming up. It was what looked like a little residential road with maybe 4 houses scattered on either side. I took the turn with no hesitation. I wanted to get as far away from that car as possible. But about 10 seconds later, the car actually turned car actually turned off and made the same left turn in the middle of nowhere. There was about a 0% chance they belonged on that road. At that point, I knew for a fact they were following me. It wasn't even up for debate anymore. I got this really sick feeling in my gut, like I was in genuine danger. For all I knew, I probably was. By then, my heart was beating through my chest, the same way it would if someone had a gun to my head. I don't know why, but that's the easiest analogy I can think of. I just felt so helpless out there in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea what that person wanted or why they were locked onto me, but none of the reasons I could think of did anything but terrify me. I just wanted to get somewhere safe and somewhere public, with lights and people. As if on cue, I heard that god-awful chime that indicates a near-empty gas tank. I swear to God, I've never felt so powerless. My car's old. It's a 2012 Corolla that's been through more than its fair share of problems. Sometimes the gas light gives me 20 miles. Sometimes I'm lucky to get 10. And out there, in that part of the state, there's not exactly a gas station on every corner. I pulled out my phone and looked up the nearest 24-hour spot. It was over 8 miles away. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I didn't have a choice. I wasn't about to pull over, not with that car still tailing me. I thought about calling the police, but I felt like it would have been a waste of time so far out in the middle of nothingness. Cops out there take years to arrive anywhere, and there was part of me that felt like calling the police would make the danger more real. I know how irrational that sounds, and I feel pretty embarrassed even writing that down, but I'm just trying to be as honest as possible about how I felt. The gas needle dropped to empty a couple minutes later. Not just low, empty. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel myself starting to spiral. Every little sound in the car felt louder. The road felt longer. I felt stupid for being so powerless, but I didn't know what to do to change that. I knew I wasn't going to make it to the gas station. Scenarios started flashing through my head about what would happen once my car ran out of gas, but by some miracle, I finally spotted the glow of the gas station sign up ahead. I almost cried, to be completely honest with you. I took the turn hard and pulled into the lot in one quick motion to give myself some time to get out of the car and book it inside, and that's exactly what I did. I jumped out and ran inside, barely shutting my car door behind me. From inside, I could see the Altima through the window. It slowed to a stop at the edge of the lot and sat there for maybe 10 seconds with the engine still running. No one got out though. It was almost like whoever was inside was debating whether to continue pursuing me or not. And then, out of nowhere, it peeled off, fast, and disappeared back down the road we had come from. I told the gas station guy what happened, and he offered to call the police for me. Even after talking to the police, I still felt very unsettled. I know it's not the scariest thing to have happened to someone, but there's no explanation for what happened to me that doesn't involve whoever was driving that car having sinister intentions. And that feeling of pure fear, I hope I never have to experience that ever again. I made it home and told myself I'd never drive along rural back roads in the middle of the night ever again. The story doesn't end there though. A few weeks later, something happened that made my stomach drop all over again. I was sitting at home watching the news one evening, just background noise really, when a segment came on about 2 men suspected of armed robbery, attempted murder, and a bunch of other things in rural Alabama. They showed a blurry still from a security camera that mentioned that authorities believed he had fled in a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen headed east. When I heard that, I just froze up. That's who had been following me. I knew it in my gut. There was no way to prove it was the same person who followed me that night, but I'm telling you, I felt it. The timing lined up, the location lined up, and the description of the car was basically identical. I immediately told my story to the police, and that's when it really all hit me. My own stupidity could have prevented 2 extremely dangerous men from being caught. I will never forgive myself for not calling the police sooner, and it's something I actually think about pretty often. I never got an update from the police, and I never heard anything about the incident on the news. If anything ever changes, I'll send an update. My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. Plus, I had a bike, so I didn't really mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions. There were a handful of alumni, 1 or 2 TAs, and a few older people getting their degrees later on in life. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, even though she looked a little older than that. She had graying hair and walked with a sort of limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was really quiet and mostly kept to herself, and she always had this blank expression on her face. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university, maybe faculty, or maybe an alumni, but no one explained, and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was a little weird to begin with because the 2 other houses had their own kitchen, so I wasn't sure why she'd be hanging out in ours. She wasn't cooking or eating or even talking to anyone. She was just standing there while the rest of us were talking and running around, making dinner and listening to music. She didn't try and join in, she just watched us blankly. I caught eyes with her a few times, and part of me got the feeling that she was watching me specifically, even though I knew that was unlikely. No one acknowledged her, which I thought was a little weird too. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing some homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was, staring up at me. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, she wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather in the middle of the street. It was getting late, and it was decently cold too, so she must have been freezing out there. I couldn't tell if she was looking into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I felt like she was staring at me specifically. I don't know why I did it, but I waved at her, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I instantly regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times like she was excited and then ran towards one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt kind of sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I had confirmed that she had been looking into my room the entire time, and even if she hadn't, she now knew which room was mine. Later that night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He told me that that woman had always been there and that I should try my best to ignore her like the rest of them did. I inquired further about her, but the guy genuinely didn't know anything. Her like the rest of them did. I inquired anything and said he was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved in. It didn't sit right with me, so I asked around until I got some semblance of an answer. One of the seniors in the specific house she lived in told me that she was associated with the university and was a little kooky, but that she didn't have a history of violence or getting physical. I asked him why no one found that as strange as I did, and he told me that they really couldn't control who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. I wasn't fully satisfied with that answer, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to just block her out of my mind. But then it got worse. One night, I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I literally jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on like a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She barely even reacted. Instead, she just turned and walked away as if I were the one who had intruded on her. I'm not going to go into every little detail, but there were several more occurrences like that one where I caught her either snooping somewhere where she had no business being or doing something she had no business doing. At some point, I lost my room key. All 3 houses had once been part of the same hotel, so all the rooms had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people just left their doors unlocked. But I was someone who couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could just walk into my room, so losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was pissed because I'd have to go make a copy of the key, and that was an extra annoyance I couldn't afford at the time. A few nights later, I woke up randomly in the night. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it. There was a soft bumping coming from my closet every 20 seconds or so. It sounded like something shifting behind the door, like something was moving inside of my closet. I'm not one to scare easily, and I'm definitely not one to be helpless in a dangerous situation, so I was going to deal with this myself. I quietly got out of bed and took a deep breath. I slowly walked over to the closet, trying to keep my breathing under control. My heart was racing. In one fluid motion, I ripped the closet door open and screamed like a crazy person. Just as I expected, the woman was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck, and her eyes were wide open. She was holding a kitchen knife with her other hand. My scream must have startled her, because before I could react, she lunged at me with the knife outstretched. I screamed again, only this one wasn't pretend. It was a scream of pure fear. I wrestled her to the ground and was able to disarm her pretty easily, given how frail and small she was. That didn't make the situation any less terrifying, though. She kicked and fought and bit as I pinned her to the ground, screaming the whole time. I yelled for help, and I heard some doors slam, followed by some of my housemates running down the hall. My friend Lee immediately helped me immobilize the woman, and the two of us kept her pinned while someone else called the police. The rest of the night was a blur. The police got there quickly and arrested her on the spot. By that point, she had stopped screaming, but she refused to say anything either, which was extremely unsettling. The cops found my room key on her. Real big shocker there. A few weeks later, we got our answer about who she was. Apparently, she was the property manager's sister, who he had been letting live there under the radar. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he had just thrown her into one of the unoccupied rooms. I believe the property manager was eventually arrested for negligence and a slew of other things, and rightfully so. I honestly blame him so much more for what happened than her. If anything, I feel bad for her, but my pity won't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have lost my life that night. I have no idea why she seemed so interested in me specifically, but I can only hope nothing like that ever happens to me again. I'm graduating soon, and I'm definitely going to miss college, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look back on my time here without thinking about that night. This isn't really my story, but I essentially watched the whole thing happen, so I'm telling it anyway. I've lived in a modest 2-story home with my husband Benjamin for the better part of 20 years now. All of our kids are out living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. Someone had just moved into the house across the street, which was really nice because I was getting sick of looking out at a vacant house all the time. I'm retired, so I spend a lot of time on my front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with my husband, you name it. I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts out there, and sometimes I'll just play music. The person who moved into the house across the street was a young guy, maybe mid-20s. He drove an expensive-looking BMW and always dressed in flashy clothing, so I figured he was either well-off or seriously pretending. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression about him. He was actually really sweet. He introduced himself to us after a few days. His name was Quinn, and he was a few years out of college, like I had guessed. He was a really bright guy and got along really well with Benjamin. They laughed and talked about sports, and Benjamin even dropped a few of his own college stories that I hadn't heard in a long time. Quinn said he worked in the entertainment industry, and that he did freelance work for some internet personality person, whatever that means. It kind of went over my head, but it must have been lucrative. He looked pretty wealthy, like I said. He talked about stocks with Benjamin and told us about some of the investments he was making. All in all, he seems like a nice guy. Things were normal for a few months. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on my porch, so Quinn would often wave to me when leaving his house, and I always waved back. I can't remember exactly when, but I started noticing the same girl going over to Quinn's house every so often. She drove a little white convertible and she was pretty, young, blonde, the type of girl you'd expect a guy like him to date. To be frank, she dressed a bit scandalously, which I didn't fully appreciate. I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe checking on the house while he was out. She had her own house key, so it made sense. It became a regular thing. Once, maybe twice a week, I'd see that car roll up while Quinn was gone. She'd go inside, stay for a while, then leave. I didn't really understand what she was doing, but young people date differently these days, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Then, one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat. That confirmed it. She was his girlfriend, just as I had assumed. But shortly after that day, things started getting tense. At least, that's what it seemed like. One afternoon, I was out tending to my little garden when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the girl were standing in the driveway, yelling at each other. I couldn't catch what they were arguing about, but I didn't need to. She kept throwing her hands in the air, practically spitting her words at him. It looked like she was going to strike him. Eventually, she got in the car, slammed the door, and tore off down the road. Quinn shook his head and went back inside. I don't even think he noticed me. I figured it was a lover's spat. Every couple fights, and it wasn't my place to butt in where I was unwelcome. But then I saw that girl's car in front of his house again when he wasn't home. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I told Benjamin, and he said it was rude to pry and that I should just leave the poor boy alone, which I agreed with. But then came the night everything went sideways. Benjamin and I were asleep when we woke up to sirens blaring outside. We rushed outside, joining the handful of neighbors who had come out to see what was going on. Quinn's house was swarming. Police cars, an ambulance, the whole nine. We watched as the cops emerged from his house with that girl in handcuffs. She didn't struggle or scream, just accepted what was going on and stared ahead with a blank expression. We saw Quinn being rushed outside on a stretcher. He was a bloody mess, and I gasped at the sight. We didn't see him for a week after that. I was worried sick. When he finally came back, Benjamin and I walked over to check on him. He let us in without hesitation and told us everything. Apparently, that girl, her name was Ellie, had confessed to everything, making things easy for the police. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his house key. She had stolen his spare and made a copy without him knowing. According to him, she started asking him for things. Fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she got possessive and angry, which was when things started going downhill in their relationship. Every time she had shown up unannounced to his house, he hadn't been aware. She had access to his location through his phone, which I didn't even know was possible. She had gone through all of his stuff, but worst of all, she had planted hidden cameras in his room. Every time she went back to his house when he wasn't there, she was replacing the camera batteries and making sure they were still working. The argument between them that I overheard was Quinn's attempt at breaking up with her. She refused, and Quinn reluctantly agreed to go on a break. Ellie had seen everything through the cameras, and the next night, she went to his house with a knife. I'm not going to explain the rest, you get the idea. Somehow, Quinn managed to get her to the grounds, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctors said he was an inch away from needing surgery, or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned his lesson about flaunting his money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out not long after. He said he didn't feel safe in that house anymore, and that his ex had tons of friends just like her, and he didn't feel comfortable with the thought that they might have known where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's doing okay. No one should ever have to go through something like that, especially not someone as young as him. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I try to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s amongst so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that, and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon, and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, hell, why not right now? To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seems like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough, and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him. Not in a hostile way, just in a you-do-you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party, that much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs. But there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it.
I'm so excited to share this very special home, 32 Maple Ave, in the beautiful beach town of Nahant, Massachusetts.
And as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. So did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Damon's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing, though. Days passed and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about, even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party, unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him. This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, and I usually stick to late night shifts. The roads are quieter and the tips are better, but there is a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I'd always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, even came close to being as strange as what I'm about to tell you. I didn't have a dash cam at the time, and that night was the main reason I installed one. It started off normal enough, just me and the odd sounds my car would occasionally make. I've got this beat up 2005 Volvo, but it's reliable as hell. The streets were quite literally deserted, which like I said earlier, I preferred. Sometime after 2 p.m., I got a request from a convenience store nearby. Seemed harmless at first, but for some reason, I got this weird feeling in my gut about it. You ever get that feeling like something's off, but you can't explain why? That's exactly what hit me as I drove up. Before I even saw the guy, I figured out why I was getting that gut feeling. The convenience store I was pulling up to was closed. All the lights were off, and there was not a single car in the lot. As I pulled closer, I saw him. I made sure to drive pretty slowly so I could get a good look at him. He was pacing outside the store, wearing this ratty hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. I'm not kidding about that. There was literally a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he thought someone was after him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I probably should have just canceled the ride and driven away. I even hovered my finger over the cancel button, but I didn't for whatever reason. I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. I regretted my decision the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most people either scroll on their phones or stare out the window, but not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror, not blinking, not looking away, just staring directly at me. I tried not to stare back, but I couldn't help but catch his eye a couple of times. He looked kind of angry, which was also pretty unsettling. I tried to ignore him and turned on the radio to break the silence. I don't even remember which station I clicked on, but the moment the music started playing, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell he was a smoker right away. That kind of caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little bit. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror and just did as he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I didn't say anything, and we drove in silence for a while. I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we got to his stop. That's what I was hoping for, at least. But then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. He just leaned back and muttered something to himself that I couldn't hear. Then he started going on about how he used to be an Uber driver and he quit because some punks stole some stuff from his car. He was slurring his words a bit, so I couldn't make out everything he said, but I got the gist of the story for the most part. I looked in the mirror once or twice while he was telling me the story, and I realized he was smiling the whole time, which was incredibly unsettling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. He concluded his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That comment was what did it for me. I started thinking about him as more of a threat than just a crazy drug addict. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do about it. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline, but the guy did not know when to stop talking. He kept babbling about nonsense, some of it concerning and some of it just gibberish. I honestly couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone, although I don't think it was me. He began insinuating that he had just done something awful and that he was a bad person. He kept saying, "I didn't mean it," repeatedly, followed by a few frantic "I'm sorries." I didn't respond, worried that he'd do something if I did. I didn't know what he'd done or what he was capable of, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he snapped out of his muttering haze and yelled at me that I had missed the turn. I didn't miss it. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over, so that's what I did. My hands were shaking at that point. I just wanted the nightmare to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it crept down the road, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying almost perfectly flat on my back seat with his eyes closed. I whipped my head back around before he saw me, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed in that position for a really uncomfortable amount of time. I wanted to ask him to leave, but decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me I had gotten lucky. Before I had a chance to do anything, he opened my car door and disappeared. I ended up calling my shift short after that. I was shaken up and didn't feel like driving around anymore. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I came across something on my phone that proved how dangerous of a situation I had been in. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed on the night I picked up that passenger. It was 2 blocks from where I had picked that guy up. It makes me sick knowing I was inches away from a dangerous criminal who could have harmed me if he had chosen to. I'm a little scared to contact the police about this. I try to avoid law enforcement for various personal reasons I won't get into. I'm not really sure if my report would even help. Either way, I'm much more cautious about who I let in my car. I used to live in the city. The urban lifestyle is honestly what I always envisioned for myself. I'm not going to get into it, but after an extremely traumatic experience, I couldn't bear even the smallest noises. I began to hate noise in general. My psychiatrist told me I had developed a rare case of phonophobia. So that pins and needles feeling you get when your foot falls asleep. It's kind of like that, but in my chest. Always there, like my body was bracing for something that wasn't coming. Every car horn or slamming door felt like a jolt straight to my nerves. I couldn't keep living like that. About 3 years ago, I found a cabin buried deep in the Pacific Northwest. I don't want to say exactly where it was for reasons you'll soon understand, but all I'll say is that it was somewhere in Oregon. It seemed perfect. Very few neighbors, no traffic, barely any cell service. What really sold me on it, though, was the lack of noise. It was just me and the peace and quiet. For the first time in months, I thought I might actually feel safe. The cabin itself was small but cozy. To be fair, it was exactly what the listing had promised. You could tell it had been built to last, with thick wooden beams and a sturdy stone fireplace. It smelled like pine and old books when I first walked in. You know, that kind of earthy scent that's almost comforting. Think like one of those old cabin-style bed and breakfasts, for any of you who have gone skiing before. The nearest neighbor lived about a 10-minute walk down a narrow dirt path. I didn't meet her right away, though. For the first few days, I just soaked in the silence. I'd wake up to the sound of birds instead of sirens, and at night, the only thing I heard was the wind brushing through the trees. It was like the whole world had pressed pause, and I could finally breathe again. I did all my work from my laptop, so there really was no need for me to connect with the outside world beyond that. About a week after I moved in, there was a knock at the door. The cabin obviously had no doorbell, so those knocks were something I'd have to get used to. I opened the door, expecting it to be my neighbor, and it was. It was a moderately old woman carrying a basket of preserves like she just stepped out of a Hallmark movie. She introduced herself as Michelle and told me she lived about 10 minutes down the trail, which didn't sound far at all until you factored in how dense the woods were. I mean, you could get turned around in there just looking for firewood. She was in her late 60s with oddly long gray hair and these piercing blue eyes that made you feel like she could see right through you. She wasn't rude exactly, more like blunt. She welcomed me to the woods and extended the basket toward me like she was expecting me to take it. I didn't really have much of a choice. She was practically shoving it in my face. I know it sounds hospitable, but her vibe seemed a little off, if that makes any sense. I grabbed it impulsively, but I admit I had never been treated that way by a neighbor before. It wasn't anything crazy, but it wasn't something I was used to. I thanked her as I took the basket, and she looked at me like she was expecting me to say something else. I honestly didn't know what else to say, so I just smiled. She kept staring at me awkwardly, which confirmed my suspicion that this woman didn't interact with a lot of people. Eventually, she spoke. She said, and these were her exact words, which I'll never forget, "Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe." It wasn't something a normal person would say to someone else. It was like she was reciting from a rule book. It honestly sounded more like a warning than advice. I nodded, smiled, and turned to go back inside. After shutting the door, I stood there in silence, waiting to hear her footsteps walk away. She didn't walk away for a good 45 seconds, which was probably the strangest part about the whole interaction. Despite the weird vibe, I did appreciate her kindness. She seemed reclusive, but not unfriendly, the kind of person who'd help you if you asked, but wouldn't go out of her way to pry. I told myself it was nice to know someone was close by, even if I didn't plan on needing her. I didn't even bother looking in the basket. I just set it down in the living room and forgot about it. There was a thunderstorm that night, which is extremely rare for Oregon, but it does happen. I lit a few candles and curled up on the couch with a book, trying to ignore the fact that the power was flickering every few minutes. Some of you might find that kind of isolation scary, but I actually loved it. For some reason, my brain wasn't freaked out by the natural sounds of the thunderstorm. It was actually that specific storm which gave me that realization. I listened intently to everything outside, and it was, dare I say, soothing. But of course, that peaceful feeling didn't last. A few hours after the storm started, there was a knock at the door that nearly made me jump out of my skin. I say knock, but it was really more of a banging. It was loud and definitely not natural, like whoever it was didn't care that it was pouring outside. My heart started pounding, and I began to feel that god-awful tingly sensation in my chest. After hesitating for a few seconds, I grabbed a flashlight and got up to check who it was. I looked through the little glass window pane next to the door. It was Michelle, soaked to the bone and clutching a flashlight. I opened the door, and she spoke before I even had a chance to greet her. She blurted out that she saw someone near my woodpile and that I should know about it. I was beyond confused, but her words were incredibly concerning, and that took precedence. I stepped out onto the porch, shining my flashlight into the rain, but I couldn't see anything but trees. I asked her if she was sure, and she nodded. Her eyes kept darting to the woods like she was expecting someone to emerge from it any second. The whole thing was pretty freaky. I kept looking around, but there wasn't much I could make out between the darkness and the chaos of the storm. before I could say anything else, she told me to be careful and began walking away without waiting for a response. I watched her head back down the path toward her cabin, clearly unfazed by the pouring rain. I stood there until the glow of the flashlight disappeared out of sight, and then I went back inside. The literal second I shut the door, I realized her story was riddled with holes. How could she have seen someone near my woodpile if her house was 10 minutes away? She must have been on my property to begin with. Why the hell would she be snooping around my cabin during a thunderstorm? Was she lying? It didn't sit right with me, but marching over to her house in the middle of a thunderstorm was the last thing I was going to do. Still, I had to do something. I locked up the cabin as securely as I could and sat in my room, listening. The storm started to die down after a while, but I still felt pretty uneasy. A few more hours passed without incident, so I decided that it was probably safe to go to sleep. I can't remember exactly what time it was, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of a branch snapping just outside my bedroom window. I'm a really light sleeper, so I was 100% positive it was a branch snapping and not something else. I froze in place for a few tense seconds, listening. Eventually, I crept to the window, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. At first, I didn't, but then I spotted her. Michelle. She was standing at the edge of the woods, her body angled away from my house. I could tell it was her because her hair was so long and disheveled. I strained to make out more, but being as there was only moonlight to help me see, it was no use. I saw her beginning to turn around, so I ducked beneath the window before she could catch me looking at her. I stayed crouched there for what felt like forever. When I finally mustered the courage to peek again, she was gone. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I hadn't exactly pegged her as dangerous, just weird. But at that point, I was having second thoughts. It didn't make sense. Why would she try and warn me earlier if she was the one poking around? I didn't sleep for hours. I was pretty dead set on just staying up until sunrise. A few hours passed, and I was starting to get tired. As I finally began letting my guard down, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't like the banging from earlier. It was actually kind of quiet. Still, I wasn't going to get up under any circumstances. The pins and needles started up again as I quietly made my way over to the door. I took an inconspicuous glance through the pane and froze in horror. It wasn't Michelle. It was a burly-looking bald guy with a thick beard. I had to fight every bone in my body not to yell out in fear. The situation instantly went from a 6 to a 10. As quietly as I could, I retreated to my bathroom, locked the door, and called the police. As I was on the phone with them, I started to hear banging on the front door, like someone was repeatedly smashing it with a heavy object. The operator told me help was on the way and instructed me not to hang up. I sat there more terrified than I'd ever been in my entire life. Eventually, the front door gave way, and I heard it crash open. I genuinely thought I was going to die. That man, whoever he was, started smashing things in my cabin. At least, that's what it sounded like. All I could hear was the sound of glass breaking and wood splintering. I didn't dare make a sound. Luckily, that man didn't seem to look for me, because I never heard his footsteps leave the living room. Eventually, the smashing sound stopped, and I was sitting in complete silence again. I had been fighting off a panic attack the whole time. To my surprise, the police actually arrived pretty quickly, but not soon enough to catch that guy in the act. He was long gone. I pleaded with the officers to help me out, but they were downright useless. They did a pathetic search of the surrounding property, but that was it. They wouldn't even agree to search the woods, saying that it was too dense and they were unlikely to find him there anyway. I begged them to accompany me to Michelle's house at least, which they agreed to. When we got to her property, my jaw literally dropped. The entire cabin was abandoned. The cops confirmed this and said no one had lived there in decades. I told them they had to search it for squatters, but they told me there was no reason for them to do that. They tried to tell me that there was no clear signs of habitation, so it would be a waste of time. I damn near lost my mind when I heard them say that. I tried to argue, but they more or less told me that living in the woods was a risk I was taking and was not their problem. They left after that, which infuriated me. I obviously moved out of that cabin, but not before spending one more night there. It was awful, but I made it through without anything happening. Things have been good for me since then, but I still constantly think of this experience. Some of my superstitious friends have theorized that Michelle was actually a spirit that was trying to protect me, and that she was really just trying to watch over my property for whatever reason. I don't believe in the paranormal, so I think it's much more likely that two people, her and that man, had been squatting in that abandoned cabin. I just still don't understand why they decided to target me, or why Michelle would bother to warn me if she were planning on breaking into my house. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Luke. My girlfriend Catherine and I met 3 years ago as freshmen in college. We go to Stanford, which has been my dream school since I was like 8. Neither of us are from California. Pretty far from it, actually. We're both Ohio, from Cincinnati, and just outside Columbus. I think that's a big reason we were so attracted to each other. I think people from similar areas are naturally drawn to each other for whatever reason. Stanford is not a huge school, but most of the student body is originally from California, so us being from the Midwest definitely differentiates us. One of the traditions we've created is how we split Christmas between our families. Catherine's popular amongst my relatives, so her presence is always appreciated and welcomed, damn near expected at this point. Since her house is just a 2-hour drive from mine, we decided early on to spend Christmas Eve with my family, who celebrates Christmas Eve night, and then drive through the night to her house for Christmas Day. Until I met her, I didn't realize that most families celebrate Christmas the day of, not the night before. Oddly enough, my favorite part of the holiday isn't Christmas Eve or Christmas Day though, it's that late night drive. It's become its own little tradition, something we both look forward to every year. The first time we did it still remains one of my favorite memories with her. Because of where I live, the quickest route from my house to hers doesn't take us on a major highway. Most of the route is quiet back roads, just fields, trees, and the occasional distant farmhouse. It's always really late at night when we do it, so in combination with the secluded route, we rarely encounter any other cars. It feels like the world is asleep, and we have it all to ourselves. Don't laugh, but we always blast Juice WRLD during the drive. His music has been a shared obsession since we met. I know his music is a little cringy, but something about singing the lyrics together is really special. It's like we're in sync. This past Christmas Eve started like any other. After a wholesome night with my entire extended family, we packed up my car around midnight and hit the road. The snow was falling lightly, and the roads were deserted as expected. With the music and heat cranked up, everything felt perfect. That all changed in an instant though. What I'm about to describe to you is still one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. Probably the most unsettling thing. I was driving along when the music was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced down, a little irritated that I'd be getting a call this late. It was an unknown number. I ignored it without thinking. Probably a scam call. Those things are constant these days. Catherine made a joke about how committed those call center guys must be making calls on Christmas. I laughed in agreement, and that was that. But then, a few minutes later, my phone rang a second time. I again looked down and saw that it was another unknown number, probably the same one as before. I sighed, irritated, but let it go to voicemail. Catherine glanced at me and raised her eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I tilted my phone towards her to show her that it was an unknown number, and she said, "That's so weird," with a confused look. I didn't respond. Instead, just shrugged my shoulders. The music eventually resumed, and I tried to take my mind off the phone calls. But of course, not 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. I was pissed at that point, cursing under my breath as I fumbled wildly for my phone. I snatched it from the console and swiped aggressively across the screen, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off for spamming my phone. I could tell I startled Catherine, as her body tensed up with my sudden movements. In hindsight, I probably overreacted, but I was sick of being harassed. I basically barked hello into the phone with as sharp a tone as I could muster. I expected the scam script to begin, but I was instead met with silence. I turned up the volume in my car and immediately picked up on a faint static coming from the other side of the line. I was about to hang up when a man's voice spoke. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. "Hello, Luke." I was so caught off guard I nearly swerved off the road. I couldn't speak. I felt my whole body starting to itch, which always happens to me when I'm nervous. Before I could respond, the man continued. He started reciting personal information, my full name, my address, details about my life that no stranger should know, details that no stranger could know. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to pull over on the side of the road, but I kept driving like I was in some kind of trance. I considered shouting at him, but decided that anger wasn't the best resource in a situation like this. After he paused for a few tense moments, I finally spoke. I asked him what he wanted in a steady voice, trying to hide the fear I was feeling. The voice paused before delivering the words that made my blood run cold. He said that he wasn't here for me, that he was here for Catherine. Hearing my girlfriend's name was about 100 times more terrifying than hearing my own, and the horrified expression on her face told me that she was just as shocked as I was. I blurted out that I didn't know a Catherine, that he must have the wrong number. The man chuckled before saying, "She's sitting right next to you." That was too much for me. I pulled over on the side of the road. I had no choice. My hands were literally shaking in fear. I was about to say something when Catherine reached into my lap in one fluid movement and hung up the phone. Just like that, I literally screamed in her face, demanding to know why she hung up on a stranger that was making personal threats towards us. She didn't answer, just looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. I desperately tried to call the number back, once, twice, 3 times, but it never went through. Catherine told me to keep driving, which I ultimately did, but not before questioning her. She told me she was scared and that I couldn't blame her for hanging up, which I guess was fair. I drove off in silence, but I still couldn't understand why she'd hang up the phone. I don't know whether I was more furious or afraid. Part of me was expecting that number to call back, but after about 10 minutes, I felt like it was increasingly unlikely. At one point, I looked over at Catherine and saw tears in her eyes. She told me she didn't feel safe, which I empathized with. Something in the pit of my stomach gnawed at me, though. Catherine and I had been through enough in our relationship to know that trust didn't always come easily. There had been little things, white lies, half-truths, moments where I caught her being less than honest. I knew I was being paranoid, though. How could she possibly have done anything to do with this? The rest of the drive was silent. I didn't play the music again, and neither of us spoke. My mind was still spinning with a million unanswered questions. Who the hell was that guy? How did he know so much about me? Only my family knew where we were driving that night, and they'd never pull a stunt like this. I was 100% sure of it. I couldn't think of another explanation, though. Even when we finally pulled into Catherine's driveway, I didn't feel much better. It's been almost a month since this happened, and I have yet to get my answers. Neither of our family members were responsible. We asked all of them. Catherine swears she's just as clueless as I am, which leads me to believe the person on the other end of the phone call had sinister intentions. You might think I'm overreacting to a harmless prank, but I'm telling you, other than our family members, there are no people on earth who knew Catherine and I would be driving that night. I've been really tense ever since. I can't help but brace myself every time my phone rings. I know he's going to call me again eventually. It's just a matter of time.
We asked people who said they've had Domino's stuffed crust pizza before to compare it to our new stuffed crust.
That's better than the one they have currently.
Only Domino's.
I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's sort of an all-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom had commented on my Instagram story asking when I leave, and I said today. He told me he lived an hour outside of Austin, which was actually in the direction home for me. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He said I should stop by, and I said sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it said about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, I noticed his house was a little old-fashioned. It wasn't run down or anything, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, and when he opened the door, I caught the scent of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was, of course, very welcoming, giving me a big hug and pulling me inside. Some friendships stay just as pure no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been around since the 70s, and every step I took on the hardwood floors led out a small creak. It felt kind of Texas, I guess. It was kind of charming in a way, like stepping back in time. We sat down in his living room, catching up on life, drinking whiskey. It was like 5 p.m. by this point. One drink turned into two, two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes, honestly. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he dropped the question I knew he'd ask. "Hey man, you got a long drive back. Why don't you crash here for the night?" he offered. I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road. I said yeah, good idea, and asked if I'd take the couch we were on. And then he said, "Nah, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." That was good enough for me. We ate some Chinese food that we had delivered, and after a while, he led me down a short hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I remember the air in the room was still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a little bit of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, it looked like a long black trench coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape of it felt wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric and more like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into the bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It was just a coat, nothing more, but I couldn't help myself. I peeked again, still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out there before I woke up again. It wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now, dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun. My body was buzzing with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thudding against my ribs. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door. I threw the covers off and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering he was out from all that alcohol. He finally woke up very confused, rubbing his eyes. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, confused. "What coat?" he said. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person almost." Tom sat up, looking more awake now. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he was messing with me, that this was some kind of joke, but his expression stayed serious. "Come look," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head. He asked me if I was sure I wasn't just dreaming, but I said I know what I saw. I insisted, with my voice shaking slightly. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone," I said. We stood in the room for a few moments, both of us feeling the same eerie silence pressing in on us. Tom finally exhaled and shook his head, agreeing we should check the house just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, nothing that could explain what I saw. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I had been in some kind of half-dream state, seeing things that weren't there. I wanted to believe that, really. I didn't want to think about the alternative. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner, the way it was just gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, but to this day he's never admitted to anything, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden when we were on a road trip. My parents, Anna, and I were going on a domestic trip, and we had an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one. The day came, and we arrived in the city where the theme park was located, but we planned to visit it the next day, so we needed a place to sleep. Since we had brought tents in our car, my dad searched online for a nearby campsite. He found one that seemed good and close by, so he called the campsite. Unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament, and the campsite was fully booked. Since we hadn't reserved a spot in advance, there was no space left for us. My dad called around, but we couldn't find any campsites that were reasonably priced and near the theme park. Our only option was to find a camping spot in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was a good place to stay. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to sleep in a small, lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest, and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something told me it would be better to camp in the parking lot. As we got out of the car to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked like it was in bad condition, and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, so there were no more people at the beach or hiking in the woods. However, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents set up our tents. They were sleeping in one tent, while Anna and I shared the other, with both tents placed close together. After struggling to build them, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, watched YouTube, and ate snacks. By this time, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep at a decent hour so we wouldn't be too tired the next day. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. At this point, my parents were already asleep in their tent. Anna and I were scrolling through TikTok when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. It sounded like a shovel being thrown onto the gravel. We both jumped in fear and asked each other what it could be. Too scared to peek out of the tent window, we chose to stay silent and listen. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. We then heard what I assumed was a shovel being thrown into the car's trunk, followed by the trunk slamming shut. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding. Then we heard the car speed off as if someone were trying to get away quickly. I texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were staying. He replied, warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, with organized criminals often engaging in illegal activities there. We had no idea about this before. When I read my friend's message, I felt cold and deeply unsettled. About 10 minutes passed in silence after the car sped away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little, when out of nowhere, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from a man coming from the woods. We were absolutely horrified. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard a loud scream. When she didn't respond, I called her phone to wake her up. She finally answered and said neither she nor my dad heard anything. She reassured me that it was probably nothing serious, but at that moment, I couldn't think of any normal reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled under the blankets, terrified, not knowing what was happening. Every minute felt like an hour. Even though it was midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Suddenly, everything became eerily silent. Then, my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear. I put my phone down so that its light wouldn't illuminate the tent. My heart was racing and I could hear my own pulse. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at this hour. The footsteps moved around our tent first, then toward my parents' tent, and then circled around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be looking at our tents. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, I heard the same car from earlier returning. Its headlights lit up our tents, and Anna and I quickly laid down to avoid being seen. I gathered the courage to peek through the small tent window. I saw the car door slam shut before it sped off again. I felt a brief moment of relief when the person left. From my vantage point, I could see the road they had driven down. 5 minutes later, I saw another car approaching fast. It was a police car, racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Anna and I were still shaken, so we decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer. I stayed awake until around 5 a.m., keeping watch over the forest, while Anna eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, we went back to our tent, and out of sheer exhaustion, finally fell asleep. We woke up around 9 a.m. completely drained. I told my mom everything that happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps, but when the person was near their tent, she had also heard heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies during a scary phone call. She had been terrified too. However, my dad had slept through the whole thing, so we had to tell him the story. Without hesitation, we immediately packed our things and the tents, eager to leave as soon as possible. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. Despite the terrifying night, we had a good time at the theme park later that day. However, that evening, I decided to research the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death due to gang-related debts. Even more disturbingly, 2 men had gone missing from that exact beach and had never been found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents was a dangerous individual, checking to see if there were any witnesses? What if we had been in serious danger without realizing it? Even now, I still think about that night. Who made that horrifying scream, and why was someone using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police, what exactly were they chasing? I guess I'll never know. This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 is around the age where a lot of my childhood memories start to become more clear. I have one sibling, my older brother Keith. Keith is 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8. When I was 6, I had a strict bedtime, 8:30. If I didn't abide by it, or our dad caught either of us up past our bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids. Honestly, I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake. Keith and I shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house. My parents' room was on the first floor of the house. I was confused why Keith was waking me up, until he told me in a whisper to be quiet and listen, and I did listen, and I heard what he was talking about. It was our mom's voice calling for us downstairs, but it was in a very quiet, whisperish type of voice. I was going to get up to go answer our mom, but my brother told me not to. He said that he didn't think it was Mom. I told him to stop trying to scare me. I remember being so mad at him. He told me to go closer and listen, so I got up and went towards the bedroom door. Right outside of our bedroom door was the little hall that led to the bathroom and another bedroom that our grandma would sleep in whenever she'd sleep over. Directly to the right, when you leave our bedroom, was the stairway downstairs, which had a door as well. I put my ear up on the bedroom door, and I heard the voice clearer. It sounded like our mom's voice, calling our names. Keith, Mikey. I said to Keith, "That's Mom," and he said, "No, it's not." Somehow, as a 6-year-old, and as the little brother, I found myself being the one confident enough to open our bedroom door and then listen through the stairway door. But now, the voice stopped. I whispered to Keith that Mom walked away, and again he said, "That's not Mom." I kept telling him to shut up and that he was scaring me. I unlocked the stairway door and slowly pulled it open to avoid making noise, and when the door was open just enough, I peered through the opening. At the bottom of the stairs was clear as day the silhouette of a person, a woman, but right away I knew it was not our mom. Whoever it was, she saw me because she said, "Hi sweetie, come down." Immediately I shut the door and locked it and went back into our bedroom and locked that door as well. I started to cry, and Keith kept saying, "I told you." We both agreed to start screaming as loud as we could on 3 to wake our parents. So on 3, we started stomping on the floor and screaming as loud as we could. It didn't take long for our parents to barge up the stairs pounding on the locked door. At first, our dad was pissed about the door being locked, but as soon as we let them in, they saw that I had been crying and we were genuinely disturbed about something. They listened to us. My mom was particularly concerned after telling us she was not at the bottom of the stairs and she was not calling our names. She asked what the woman looked like, but all we could say was we couldn't tell. Meanwhile, I remember our dad running downstairs to, I guess, look around for the woman. After a bit, our mom kissed us goodnight again, and I'm pretty sure she told us to lock the doors, which was a first. I was too young to catch on, but it seemed as if our parents knew exactly who it could have been. Keith and I looked out the window when we heard the doorbell after a while, and we saw a police car outside. We wanted to go downstairs, but we stayed put. I remember we begged our parents to tell us who it was and what happened, but our parents would always say they didn't know. They would also say they're proud of us for not going downstairs. Personally, I think they did know who it was, and to save my brother and I from any kind of further trauma or fear, they just never told us, because the last time I saw my parents for dinner, I asked them about it, and they still shrugged it off as some random intruder, but that never explained how that woman knew our names. This happened when I was 16. I was still in high school. I obviously didn't have a car yet, so I was at the mercy of my parents driving me around, or just walking if it was close. It was the weekend. My friend HAII was having some of our friends over since her parents weren't home. My mom drove me to her house. HAII lived close, about a 3-minute drive and 20-minute walk. My mom was single at the time, and she also liked to go out too, so she told me that if she's out late, then to just walk or get a ride home. which meant she was going on a date. A few of our girlfriends were at HAII's house, Tina, Courtney, and Belle. The 5 of us hung out in her backyard for a few hours until some boys from our school unexpectedly showed up. By unexpectedly, I mean HAII didn't tell me she was inviting them. The reason I was annoyed by this was because one of the boys that showed up was a boy I had some annoying history with and didn't really want to see. HAII thought she was being cute and sneaky by inviting him there against my knowledge, because she for some reason wanted him and I to work things out. It was just an awkward mess. There were 4 boys and 5 girls, including me, so eventually, I just decided I wasn't really feeling it. So, after a while, I left. I'm sure after I left that some of the others started to leave shortly after because it was already late, but I just didn't want to be around those boys. I made sure to let HAII know how pissed off I was over texts as I was walking home, and she kept saying, "OMG, come back." She apologized and I forgave her, but I still just wanted to go home. I walked for like 5 minutes until I slowed down. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, and when I slowed down, I confirmed I heard footsteps that weren't mine. I turned around, and there was a middle-aged man with a hood up over his head and his hands in his hoodie pocket. He was smiling, looking at me, and said, "How you doing?" I responded, "Hi," and just turned and kept walking. We were in the suburbs, people are walking around. It's not unheard of, even if it was late. 5 minutes more passed of me walking, and every time I'd glance around, that man would still be behind me, more or less the same distance away, maybe a little closer each time I looked. It was not a straight path home. I'd have to make multiple turns onto intersecting roads to get to my house, and each turn I made, he was still there. I was texting my friends about it, and then the man from behind me said, "Isn't it such a nice night? Love this weather." I replied back, "Yeah," and that was it. I started walking just a bit faster, but not enough to draw suspicion like that I'm running away. The man spoke again, and every time he opened his mouth, part of me died a little more inside. Like, why was he talking to me? Why was he following me? He asked, "Are you from the neighborhood?" I replied, "No." I was making my answer short and firm. The man chuckled. I started asking all my friends for help, to send one of the guys to come pick me up. Ironically, the boy who I was trying to avoid was on his way to come get me. I'll just nickname him Brandon. The man behind me then said something that changed everything. He said, "I'm not gonna hurt ya. You live by the elementary school, right?" I turned around, and he stopped in his tracks. He was still smiling, but now his smile seemed more disingenuous, more sinister. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and started to run. I heard the man running behind me, catching up to me. At that point, it was my life on the line, so I started screaming bloody murder. I started screaming, "Help me," for everyone in their houses to wake up and hear. The man dropped his nice guy facade and said, "Shut up, you little bitch." My screams definitely scared him off because he obviously didn't want a bunch of witnesses about to come out of their houses. He ran away into the darkness, and I saw some lights in the houses around me turn on. One couple came out of their house, and I explained I almost got kidnapped. I stayed there in front of their house until Brandon arrived to pick me up. He drove me home. It was only like a 1-minute drive after that. My mom wasn't home, she was out, and she wasn't answering my texts. I didn't want to be alone, so I invited Brandon in to stay the night. I know he was the happiest camper alive, but it didn't end there. We were up late just talking and reminiscing about old times when we both heard footsteps circling the house. My room in that house was upstairs facing the backyard. We heard the gate to the backyard opening. My mom would never enter through the backyard, so something was off. I held back from yelling out, "Mom," and instead, Brandon and I just looked out the window, watching. We didn't hear any more sounds. We were expecting to see someone walking around the yard, but instead, we both heard a man's voice say, "I see you up there." I let out a very audible gasp and I stepped away from the window. Brandon yelled out something along the lines of, "We're calling the cops, you pussy freak." That's exactly what we did. The fact that this man knew where I lived, he probably knew who I was. What if he knew I was going to HAII's house? Brandon did a lot of the talking on the phone with 911. Looking back, I know he tried really hard to be the man in the situation, and I appreciated that. I was honestly so happy he came inside. The cops showed up, and their presence just made me feel safer. Even just giving them a description of this man made me feel better, like at least something was done. My mom got home soon after, and she was just as freaked out as I was. They kept a police car parked on the block for a few hours as a deterrent, thankfully. From there on, I didn't do any walking at night. I was even scared to go into our backyard after that. My mom had to have our uncle come over and install an entire security camera system. He made no effort in hiding them. They were on full display to deter that creepy man and any other creep from coming to that house. I'm glad to say that the story ended there, because this incident also prompted my mom to sell that house about a year later, just because she hated seeing me living in constant fear in that house. We never found out who that man was. This happened when I was a little kid, maybe 6 or 7. My family has always been very religious, so Easter has always been a huge deal for us. Same with most of the other major religious holidays. Now that I think of it, even Sunday kind of felt like its own holiday with the way my parents treated church. It's actually kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are church-related. What I'm about to tell you is one of them. It was Easter Sunday, so all the services are much longer than usual. I don't mind though. My parents instilled the love of Christ in me very early on. After the service was Sunday school, or CCD as our church called it. I know lots of churches don't offer Sunday school after really important masses, but ours did. So after the mass, my parents took me downstairs to all the classrooms like they had done 100 times, and I said goodbye. I'm just going to describe the layout of the church now so this story makes sense. Our church had kind of a split-level layout. The main sanctuary was upstairs, where the altar and pews were, and then all the classrooms were in the basement. It was technically a basement, but the church was on a slope. You could still get in and out of the building from down there. There was this long, carpeted hallway down there with maybe 7 or 8 rooms branching off on each side, grouped by age. My classroom was one of the first ones on the left,
No card reader? No problem. Jim's got you covered. Accept any payment, debit, credit, Apple Pay, or digital.
This happened a few months ago, back in the spring. It was that strange in-between period of my life. Just graduated, no real responsibilities yet, and way too much free time. I'd finished school a semester early, which seemed like a great idea when I was drowning in assignments, but once I actually had all this free time, I had no clue what to do with it. My full-time job wasn't starting until June, and most of my friends were still busy with classes or finals, so until then, I was just floating, feeling like I was stuck in the gap between two phases of my life. It was actually really discomforting and made me feel worthless. I'm someone who always needs to be doing something productive, so just sitting around for days on end watching time pass was killing me. That's probably why I said yes when my mom asked me to check on my Uncle Rick's beach house. It was an easy favor: drive down to Rehoboth Beach, make sure nothing was leaking or damaged, and do some small maintenance to save Rick the cost of hiring someone. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that I'm from Pennsylvania and Rick's house is in Delaware, so the drive's not so bad, just a little over 2 hours. The house is massive, the kind that comfortably holds my entire extended family every summer. 25 of us packed into one place, playing games and drinking too much. Those two activities are honestly the only distinctive things about our family. This house isn't exactly on the shoreline, but it's not too far from the beach either. It's nestled in a quieter neighborhood lined with tall beach grass and winding roads. Fast forward to some random day of the week that I honestly can't even remember. I think it was like a Thursday or something. I left in the late afternoon, which in hindsight was probably a dumb idea. The drive was pretty chill. When I got to the house, everything seemed normal. I made my way inside and ran through Rick's checklist. I checked the faucets, the breakers, and walked the property. Everything looked fine. To be completely frank, it felt strange being there alone. I'd never seen that house without miscellaneous board games sprawled about and crowds of family members noisily drinking. The silence was definitely the most eerie thing about it. The place felt abandoned or something. I'm sure all of you have that one place, be it a house or a restaurant or something else, that gets really rowdy when your whole family spends time there together. Now try to picture that place empty and silent. Kind of spooky, right? Anyway, it was getting late, and I hate driving at night more than anything, so I texted my mom to let her know I'd just stay overnight and head back in the morning. She told me that was a good idea, and reminded me to thank Uncle Rick for letting me stay there, which I did. I made myself some food, messed around on my phone for a bit, and then started washing up for the night. Usually during family gatherings, I'd get jammed into one of the smaller rooms on the 3rd floor while other relatives got to claim the nicer, bigger rooms. I'm not complaining about the system at all. I'm just telling you how things tended to go. Since I had the house to myself that night, though, I figured I'd take advantage of it. The master bedroom on the 2nd floor has a private bathroom, a massive walk-in closet, and a ridiculously comfortable bed. The decision wasn't exactly difficult. I knew that's where I'd be sleeping. I climbed in around midnight and quickly drifted off. I don't remember what time it was when I woke up, only that something startled me awake. I was still a little groggy, but I was dead sure sound had just come from the closet, like something had fallen in there. Without making any noise, I craned my head to look at the closet. Even that small action sent my heartbeat racing. My mind was awake, but my body refused to move, like some kind of sleep paralysis without the paralysis. I could move, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to find out if there was something in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself to go back to sleep, and I almost did. But the literal second I started drifting back into sleep, I heard it. A muffled thump from inside the closet. I squinted my eyes just a smidge and tried convincing myself I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. As if overcome by some invisible force, I laid there in complete paralysis with no control over my body whatsoever. Not like before, this time it was real. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Until that moment, I didn't truly understand what it meant to be frozen in place. I listened in horror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Through barely open eyes, I watched as a dark figure stepped into the room. It just stood there beside the bed motionlessly, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each second feeling impossibly long. Then, silently, it turned and left the room. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of heading downstairs like I had expected them to, they actually creaked upstairs to the 3rd floor. My stomach churned. The only staircase led up. There was no exit from there. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but I was too afraid. I couldn't overpower a grown man. I had no idea if he was armed. The only thing I could do was wait. After a few painful moments in my own head, I worked up the courage to snap myself out of the paralysis. Quietly, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher picked up, I whispered as quietly as I could, telling them someone was in the house. I slipped out of bed and just as quietly turned the lock on the bedroom door. Then I waited. Minutes dragged painfully by until flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. I was actually kind of shocked at how quickly the police arrived. I ran down the stairs, threw open the front door, and nearly collapsed in relief when I saw the police. They didn't hesitate. They stormed inside, moving quickly through the house. I waited outside. It didn't take them long. According to them, the house was empty. I was in disbelief. I had heard the footsteps go up, and there was nowhere to go after that, so he must have still been in the house. There was no other explanation. The police insisted he must have slipped past me, that I was too freaked out to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The guy had vanished. I wasn't comfortable letting the police just leave though, so I called Rick. Rick wasn't having it. He snapped at the police and told them to check again, and that my life might have depended on it. So they did. They searched again, more thoroughly this time. Rick told me to follow them and watch what they were doing, and so I did. The officers moved methodically, opening every closet and checking under beds, tapping at the walls like they were expecting something hidden behind them. They pulled back the shower curtain in every bathroom, double-checked the locks on the doors and the windows, and that's when they found it. One of the bedroom windows on the 3rd floor, the room I should have been sleeping in, was unlocked. One of them stood by the door, while the other one went downstairs and stepped onto the back deck. I opted to go outside with the second officer, mostly because the thought of being locked in the house with some stranger sickened me. The officer shined his light around the property, but there was nothing out there. He started scanning the roof, and to my horror, his beam swept across something terrifying. It was him. It was that stranger that had been in the house. He was just sitting there on the roof. He was this disgusting-looking bald man in tattered clothing who looked like he hadn't seen a shower in years. The next hour was a blur. The cops communicated with each other, and they got the guy off the roof in cuffs. The police said he was probably homeless and squatting in the house for days, maybe longer. But when they asked him how he got in, how long he'd been there, and why he was hiding in the closet, he didn't answer. He just kept that eerie, vacant look, like none of it mattered to him. He was in the back of one of their police cars shortly after that, and that was that. The whole thing was so crazy that it's still hard to wrap my head around. As much as I try, I cannot figure out why that guy had been hiding in that closet of all places. Maybe he heard me enter the house and hid in the first place he thought of. I still don't know how he got into the house. Rick doesn't either. It's impossible to get to the roof from the ground, so I feel like that explanation is pretty illogical. The rest of my extended family has been insisting that Rick ups his home security, but he's refused every time for reasons I can't explain. The thought that had I been sleeping in my assigned bedroom, that night might have ended very differently. My buddy Mike has a beach house on the Jersey Shore. Calling it a beautiful property would be an understatement. It's magnificent, or at least, as someone who never came from much, that's what it feels like to me. I obviously don't know the history too well. It's not my family's house after all. But from what I do know, that house has been in their family for generations. Mike's grandparents had been trying to use it as their permanent place of residence for the longest time, but unfortunately, they recently passed away. Without anyone living there anymore, the house is dormant most of the time since most of Mike's extended family lives on the West Coast, and his parents are too busy to make good use out of it. The upside to an otherwise sad situation, though, is that Mike is essentially allowed free access to it whenever he wants. I'm pretty sure it was Mike's dad's intention to rent the house out to try and make some extra cash, but as far as I know, the gears aren't exactly turning on that one. It's not exactly an easy task to find someone willing to rent out a beach house during the off-season, so you can't really blame the guy. It was sometime in mid-July when Mike hit me up and asked me if I wanted to come down for the weekend. He didn't have to twist my arm. I had nothing going on, and the thought of kicking back at a beach house, especially one that was nice, was an easy yes. His plan was simple. We'd hang out, maybe hit the beach during the day, then head to the boardwalk at night and just enjoy the shore for what it was. It wasn't some crazy party weekend or anything like that, just a chill escape from the usual, and honestly, I was looking forward to it. Mike and I lived pretty close together, so he was going to pick me up and drive me down with him. That Friday, I packed a duffel, threw it in his trunk, and the two of us made the drive down. The first night was chill. We got in sometime around 6, dropped our stuff off in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in. The house has that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, like a mix of salt air and old wood. Not in a bad way, more like history. You could tell it's seen decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a sub shop nearby, we decided to walk the beach for a bit, just to take in the evening. Mike brought a couple rods with him, so we figured we'd try our luck fishing for a while. It wasn't really about catching anything though, it was more about being out there. At one point, we stumbled across a pair of girls about our age. They were walking barefoot along the shoreline, and Mike, being Mike, struck up conversation right away. They were local, or at least semi-local, and it turned into one of those low-stakes, slightly flirtatious interactions that happen naturally when you're young and on the beach at night. We got their numbers, and they continued their walk while we continued fishing. There were still a good number of people around since it was peak season, but Mike knew all the quiet pockets. Private beach access, tucked away paths through dunes, little spots between houses where the lights didn't reach. We ended up finding a nice stretch to ourselves where the only sound was the water and the wind. It was the kind of night that made you forget about real life for a bit. The next morning, we woke up around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm out by then, but there was a breeze coming off the ocean that made it bearable. We weren't doing anything crazy, just a couple miles to get the blood flowing. Mike's a pretty active guy, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a night of lounging around. The rest of the day kind of slipped by without us noticing. Later that evening, Mike floated the idea of hitting a few bars in Seaside, but we were both wiped. Even though the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in line and yelling over music didn't really line up with how our bodies felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up crashing kind of early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a shrill, piercing beeping. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but after a second or two of lying there in the dark, I realized it was real. It sounded like a smoke detector, one of those sharp, high-pitched alarms that cut straight through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and started scanning my surroundings in an effort to pinpoint where the beeping was coming from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my bedroom or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing for a few more seconds, I got the impression that it was actually coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked the bedroom door open and made a beeline for Mike's room. With both hands, I jolted him awake and told him to follow me. He immediately caught on to the situation and hurried after me, not even bothering to put a shirt on. As if our lives depended on it, the two of us bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd be running into. The third floor was mostly dark, except for a little bit of moonlight leaking in through the window at the end of the hallway. We flipped the lights on and started scanning the space, still expecting to see or smell something burning. But there was nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of a fire at all, actually. It was baffling. Eventually, after some painfully irritating minutes of searching for the source of that god-awful noise, I found something. In one of the bedrooms, tucked neatly under a pillow, was a small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to examine it myself a little, mostly out of pure confusion. It was the size of a walkie-talkie, all black with the exception of a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen, just a smooth jet black casing, that blinking light, and a single switch on the side. Or at least what looked like a switch. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike entered the room at the same time. His eyes flicked from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything at first. We locked eyes, and I could tell he was just as confused and just as scared as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked me if I had ever seen that black thing before. I said no and asked him the same, to which he also said no. For the next hour, we tried figuring out what that thing was, how it had gotten there, and what had triggered it. But no answer we came up with was satisfying. Mike swore none of his family members had been in that house in ages, and I believed him. I mean, why would he lie about that? Plus, who the hell would put that thing in their own home? You might think it was for safety or something, or maybe a substitute for a faulty upstairs smoke detector, but again, there was no fire, so it hadn't even prevented any emergencies. And then the matter of how it had gotten triggered in the first place, that was the scariest part about the whole thing. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark when I had a crazy thought. I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me until then. The switch. I pulled out the device and very quickly flipped the switch on and off, and you guessed it, the shrill beeping started up again and stopped as soon as I flipped it off. Both of us froze, and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The thought hit us both at the same time. The only way to operate the device was by hand. Someone else was in the house. We didn't waste any time. Mike dialed the police while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could. We waited for what felt like forever, and finally, the police showed up. We quickly made our way downstairs to intercept them. After giving them a very brief description of what was going on, they did a full sweep of the house while we waited outside by the front door per their instruction. When they finally came back downstairs, what they told us was horrifying. Apparently, every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And it wasn't just that. The beds were flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was on the floor. The room where I had found the device looked completely ransacked, even though it was nice and neat when we searched up there. I felt like I was losing my mind, and so did Mike. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the reality. The officers didn't find much else. No one hiding, no prints, no weapons. After another 20 minutes or so, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secured from now on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike and I didn't feel safe being in that house after someone probably crazy or on drugs, had messed with us like that, in such an unexplainable way too. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there the rest of the night and leave early in the morning, and that's what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house must have left, because nothing else happened throughout the night. There are still parts of this night I can't explain, and I can only imagine what Mike must be feeling. For all we know, whoever had been in that house that night might have never left. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years have passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The four of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the four of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out "hi" in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, Forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pinged almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remembered thinking he sounded a little off. Not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving, and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" He said, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated, but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide what to do. The ride was technically still going. I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, but I also felt like something wasn't right. My gut told me this guy wasn't just heading inside to grab something. Finally, I ended the trip manually. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway, but before I could shift into reverse, I saw him walking back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, and he had this strange look on his face, like he was angry or excited. I unlocked the doors because I didn't want to make it a confrontation, but something in me was screaming not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked, "What other place?" He said, "Just drive, I'll tell you." I said, "You need to put it in the app." He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the mirror. I said again, "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app." He didn't say a word. After a few seconds, he told me to drive to where I picked him up. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I started heading back toward the strip mall. The whole way there, I felt this pressure in the car. He wasn't talking, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He was still staring at the back of my head. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. I said, "Rough night?" He replied, "You could say that." I asked if everything's all right, and he said, "Not yet." I didn't ask any more questions. When we got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I picked him up, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, and after a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close the door right away. He just stood there for a second, half in and half out of the car. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car. This happened in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a lot of tourists, especially in the summer, so rideshare gigs can be decent money if you're consistent. I worked mostly nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because it's less traffic and better tips from drunk passengers coming back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a pretty normal Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college kids who wouldn't stop yelling in the back of my car, so I was glad to get a request that looked quieter. The name said Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The weird thing was, the pin was in kind of an odd area, not near any bars or apartments, more like near the back lot of an old strip mall. But I figured maybe it was just a bad GPS marker. It happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris?" He nodded and got in the back without saying much. He didn't smell like alcohol or slur his words. He seemed sober and just really quiet. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I asked how his night was going. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away, in a suburban neighborhood I'd been to maybe once or twice before. The thing was, it was dark out there, like no streetlights in some areas. Pretty isolated. I noticed about 5 minutes into the trip that Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling anyone. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, just shining the beam upward, slightly toward my seat. I asked him kind of half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the hum of the engine and a weird tension building in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Something just felt off about this guy. Not threatening, but definitely unsettled, like he wasn't really there. We got to the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house. But as we pulled up, I noticed it was totally dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. I asked, "Is this the right place?" Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around and looked at him. I repeated myself a little louder, saying, "Hey, is this it?" He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. So I asked again, "Are you good?" He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, and then a full minute. I was just about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and said, "Back where?" He said, "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat with no emotion. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He begged me, saying, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. I said, "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and looked empty. I waited until he got to the porch before I pulled off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A couple blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, I felt like my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie and same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was in the back of the car. I opened the driver's side door and stepped back in slowly, keeping my eye on him through the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough for me to hear his breath, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" And he said, "My parents'." I asked him if he lived there, and he said not anymore. That made the hairs stand up on my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me was screaming not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, there were still no lights, still no signs of anyone living there. He got out without saying anything and then walked up to the front door and stood there. He didn't knock or anything, he just stood still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes trying to process trying to process what just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime technically as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, and honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police because the man might have been sick in the head needing help. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. I'm an 18-year-old girl that lives alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. I never thought anything of Uber Eats being bad. You may hear some stories, but never think they will happen to you. At least that's what I thought. It was Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends, so I usually try to get it cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I had been cleaning for about 2 hours and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, as I just cleaned them all and cleaned the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I ordered my food and got the notification that my driver was on his way and driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set to leave my order at my door for contactless delivery. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food was delivered. As soon as I got that notification, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab my food, it wasn't there, so I thought maybe he set it at the wrong door. But looking down at all the doors, none of them had the food at them. So I went back in and was gonna message him when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor. He was holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry, I picked up your food from your delivery driver because he was looking through your windows and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food and thanked him, wondering what the hell just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and enjoyed a movie when I started to get ready for bed. I took a shower, then went to turn off my TV and make sure all my doors were locked before going to bed. I laid down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up a few times during the night to my dog growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Morkie, but it's still pretty scary when he growls at something and catches you off guard. I finally got him to calm down and go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog started going crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move in my bed. I took the bed sheets and pulled them over my head, just leaving enough to not cover my eyes so I could see the window. I called the police and whispered into the phone quietly. I explained to the operator that someone is in my backyard and my window doesn't lock so it can easily be lifted up. She told me to go to a different room and police would be at my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife, just waiting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen and never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's car that delivered my food. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left that's used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put two and two together and thought to myself, he's in my backyard. The police finally arrived. I could barely even speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained to one officer what happened, while the other went to check out my backyard, which is where my bedroom window is. Another officer who arrived went to check his car because it was still in the field, but he wasn't in his car. The two officers came back and started talking with the officer I was speaking to, telling her there's footprints in my backyard, which it had just rained the night before, so it was very muddy outside. I started panicking once I heard that, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy if he didn't come back arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained to him what was happening. Then he spoke about how he picked up my food for me earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer, and when all the cops left, I went back into my apartment. Thinking it was all over, I took a few hours to get comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I got up and went to my front door, scared to open it. It was the woman I spoke to earlier. She explained they stayed at my apartment, hidden to watch for that guy in case he showed back up, and he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he was going to try to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. I was 26 at the time and I'm male. I was in Washington, D.C. on a sort of vacation visiting my then fiancée. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the story. I was visiting for a graduation she was having for her basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I said why not and booked the flight to be there. I'd be arriving about a week before the rest of her family, so she and I could have some time, just the two of us, before she would be busy with having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided we wanted to go and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington had to offer. I'd never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest, and we decided to do it. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sites. From the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It really was a fun and exciting experience for myself to see all these places, as I had missed out on going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them as well, and we really enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided we had enough walking around and were ready to return to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it earlier to arrive and had no issues, so we decided to just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone, while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we did, and I could feel my body just ready to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us along the side of the road. Sarah motioned for me that this was the car, as the place they stopped at was not a parking spot or a place a car would just stop at on its own. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the man, "Uber for Sarah?" And he gave a slight nod without saying anything. So I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realized how stupid both her and myself were in doing this. We should have asked for the driver's name and verified the car was a match to the one on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, and she made the request on her phone, so it didn't really cross my mind at the time to do any of this. As we both sat in the back of the car, which was a gray-colored minivan, the driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd, as any other driver I'd ever had would at the very least greet me once I entered or confirmed my name. But this guy, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us, other than the nod he gave when Sarah asked him if he was our Uber. And I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired and didn't really feel like trying to engage with the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah after what felt like only 5 minutes of the drive. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. She then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route had said. In fact, it was the opposite way. I could see Sarah's face drain with color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized how dumb I was by not verifying the car and driver before we just both stepped in. The picture that was on Sarah's phone within the app did not match the driver, and I knew we had gotten ourselves into a situation. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew at that moment, I had to get both Sarah and I out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were in an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man of what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror in the first actual acknowledgement of us he had given since we stepped into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a word in what felt like minutes, but was probably only 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car though. He didn't even say a word in response to me, and just kept driving the car as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment, and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade out, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "You're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here, or what you think you're about to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it."